Chapter 1158. Yuanyang Sect, Mingbai Mountain. In the night, a ray of light that looked like a shooting star flew towards a temple on the cliff. The ray of light was so fast that it passed through the temple and merged with Qiao Jingdao, who was sitting in the middle of the temple. His body trembled slightly and he opened his eyes. This time, he was asked by his sect to send a clone to investigate a secret that happened in the past. This trip was not in vain, and he could be considered to have gained something. A female disciple outside said, "Jinren Qiao, someone from Jiwei Palace has come to invite you over for a chat." Qiao Jingdao said, "I know." Jiwei Palace was the abode of Jinren Wen, where the bright light cave was located. Although he and this Jinren were not master and disciple in name, they were master and disciple in reality. Even though he had become a cave, he did not dare to be negligent. Therefore, he took a short rest and went on a journey towards a floating island in the sky. After a few thousand feet, the fog in front of him dispersed and revealed a row of cloud stairs. On both sides of the stairs, there were palace maids on flying boats with big lights and bright pearls, illuminating the night sky. In the midst of the colorful clouds, there was a small mountain, and in front of it was a bamboo arch bridge. From afar, it looked exquisite, but in reality, it was quite big enough to cross a whale. When he arrived here, out of respect, he stopped flying and landed on the bridge. A beautiful lady with snow-white skin came up and said, "Palace Master and Jinren Wu are already waiting inside. Please come in, Jinren Qiao." Qiao Jingdao thought to himself, "So Jinren Wu is here too, then it must be for that matter." After crossing the bridge, he passed through a sea of jasper flowers and arrived at a palace with embroidered curtains. He saw a big gauze curtain hanging above, from which came the sound of melodious music, and there were hundreds of women dancing to the music. When he was outside the tent, he heard a voice from inside, "Is it the righteous path?" He answered and entered the tent. He bowed and said, "Disciple greets the two Zenrens." Jinren Wen said happily, "You came at the right time. This song is a new composition by junior apprentice Sister Wu's disciple, Mother Guan. We can enjoy it together." Qiao Jingdao bowed again and sat down on the guest seat. Immediately, a maid came to the table and served a precious spiritual fruit. He watched from the side and did not interrupt. He knew that although this enlightened master had a hobby of listening to music and watching dances, he was not a Taoist master. However, it was not to enjoy the pleasures of the world, but to hold onto his mortal heart and prevent himself from falling into ruthlessness. At present, the few spiritual masters of the Yuanyang sect all had their own preferences. Moreover, he had just entered the heavenly passage, and the cultivation technique he used was of the highest level. It was the time for him to work hard, so there was no need for him to act like this. When the song ended, Immortal Wen cast a glance at a beautiful woman beside him, and the latter clapped her hands. After all the dancers and musicians left the tent, Enlightened Wen turned around and asked, "Righteous Path, how was your trip? Did you find anything?" Qiao Jingdao bowed and said, "I was about to report to you, Jinren. I have indeed found some clues on this trip." Sage Wu was surprised and said, "Oh, you really found it? Does sect leader know about it?" Qiao Jingdao replied, "We haven't gotten the real results yet. I didn't dare to report this to the sect leader." After the Yuanyang sect established itself, it had been obsessed with the treasures of the Honghe Temple. With the arrival of the Great Calamity, his desire for it became even more urgent. However, it had searched all the places that should have been searched, including the original small sects of the Honghe Temple. However, it still didn't find any clues. If it wasn't for the fact that Chu Rui, the sect leader, believed that the internal strife of the Honghe Temple wasn't done in a hurry, it was impossible that they didn't leave a way out. They probably would have given up on such a move long ago. After Qiao Jingdao achieved the heavenly passage, he proposed an idea. He thought that the Honghe Temple moved from the West continent, so the treasure might not be hidden in the East Flower continent. Perhaps there were some clues left in the West continent. Therefore, he volunteered to send his avatar to investigate this place. This trip took more than 10 years. The original mountain of the Honghe Temple has long been submerged in a vast ocean. I searched for a long time, but I couldn't find anything useful. Later, I broke into a secret palace. The owner died early, but there were many talismans left by the people of the same sect. After some deduction and investigation, I think that at least before the West Continent cultivators came east, the Hongha Temple had a small world that was used to store the treasures of the sect, and the entrance talisman was only held by one person. Sage Wu thought for a while and said, "The secret palace that the righteous people broke into should be the place where the body of an ancestor of the sect stayed. This person must have a high status, or it could be a clue that the Hongha Temple intentionally left for the later generations. So it is not surprising that it could avoid the catastrophe and survive for thousands of years without being damaged." Then she looked a little excited and said, "So, sect leader Jinren's guess is correct." But Sage Wen shook his head and said, "But if there is someone in charge of this sect, why hasn't anyone entered the world to cultivate for so many years?" The previous sect master and senior sect master both personally went to the Heaven Mending Pavilion and inquired about the number of small realms that had opened in the past several thousand years. Apart from the changes within the various sects that we had no way of knowing, the rest could be traced back to their roots. They had nothing to do with the Great Unity Monastery. Qiao Jingdao said, "I have a question. Did Butian Pavilion only investigate the Donghua continent, or the 9 continents?" Sage Wen sighed and said, "Of course it was the 9 continents. But this also cost the sect more than half of the elixir jade. Because of this matter has to be investigated." Qiao Jingdao thought for a while and said, "From the letters, the person in charge of the Hongha Temple's talisman weapon might not be a cultivator, but a commoner. I didn't pay much attention to it before. Maybe it really is possible." "Not a cultivator?" Sage Wen frowned. Her first thought was that she didn't believe it. How could such a treasure, which was related to the rise and fall of the sect, be in the hands of a commoner? But after thinking about it, she felt that it was really possible. Wu Jinren's beautiful eyes flashed as she said, "If that's the case, then it makes sense. But the sea of people is vast, it might not be easier to find. If he accidentally falls into the hands of other sects, then that's even worse." Qiao Jingdao said, "It is not easy to find. If the Hongha Temple really left this item in the hands of a commoner, then it must be a noble family. Otherwise, if a commoner was in a chaotic world, he would be like a floating duckweed. He couldn't even protect his family's life, so how could he keep this magical item? This person's clan must have existed since the destruction of the Hongha Temple. As long as we check how many families are still there, if we are lucky, we might be able to find something." Sage Wu's beautiful eyes brightened and said, "That is easy. Let me calculate a little and we will know." She was about to cast a spell when Reverend Wen stopped her and said, "Shimmy, slow down. Since this involves Hongha Monastery, we need to be careful. Since it involves the Hongha Temple, we must be careful." Sage Wu was also aware of the danger. She put down her hand and said with lingering fear, "Senior sister is right. If it was just to calculate the affairs of the commoners, it was easy for her. But if the Hongha Temple made some arrangements, not only would she not know the inside story, it was very likely that he would be schemed against, resulting in a loss of lifespan and vitality." Sage Wen called the beautiful woman in and said a few words to her. The latter understood and left. About a quarter of an hour later, 2 old women with walking sticks came in. They looked like candles in the wind. Seeing the 3 cave Zenrens here, they couldn't help but be afraid. They went forward and bowed shakily. Sage Wen said, "I think you know what I want you to do. But it is dangerous. If you are not willing, you can go back." One of the old women bowed and said, "We don't have long to live. Being able to serve the sect is a good thing that we can't ask for. If something unexpected happens, I only hope that the sect can protect our clan's disciples." Sage Wen said, "Okay, I agree." The old woman bowed again and said, "Thank you, Jinren." She knew this Jinren's temper. She didn't say anything else. She sat down and began to calculate the commoners' families that survived the destruction of the Hongha Temple. After checking, there were more than 70 families. She then calculated them one by one. She wanted to see if they had any opportunities. Before every calculation, she first wrote down the origin of the family. The process was smooth at first, but when she checked a family, her body suddenly trembled. She revealed a look of disbelief. Then, her body suddenly turned into ashes and scattered in the big tent. Sage Wen stood up and looked at the paper. He said in a deep voice, "Qinghuai Chao family." Sage Wu's face was filled with anticipation and asked, "Is it this family?" Sage Wen shook his head and said, "I can't be sure yet. But the karma behind it could turn a Yuanian cultivator into ashes in an instant. It is obvious that it has a great background." Qiao Jingdao was still calm and said, "Jinren, why don't you check the rest of the families first?" Spiritual Master Wen nodded and called for another old woman. Although the latter had seen the scene just now, she had already cast aside the matter of life and death. With Spiritual Master Wen's help, she did not hesitate and continued to calculate. However, this time, until the end of the investigation of these clans, there were no changes. Sage Wen no longer hesitated and said to the beautiful woman, "Send the disciples immediately. Remember, don't make any moves. Don't alarm any sections." The beautiful woman said, "I will arrange it now." Sage Wen turned around and said, "Please sit down. I believe it won't take long for the news to come. We will know whether it is related to the Honghe Temple." Sage Wu and Qiao Jingdao nodded. The Yuanyang sect had been searching for this for thousands of years. They were not in a hurry. The three of them waited for about half a day. Suddenly, they felt a spiritual change in the southwest direction. They were shocked and hurriedly used their mana to look. They saw that near the Chung River, a small portal was opened. Then, a beam of light climbed up and reached tens of thousands of feet high. Sage Wu's expression changed and she cried out, "Oh no!" Before her voice died away, the beam of light suddenly dispersed and turned into more than 30 message talismans, flying in all directions. The direction of the message talismans was the main gate of the various sections. In Qinsong School, in order to deal with the catastrophe, the 14 Dongtian masters were discussing in the main hall. They felt the change immediately. At the same time, they saw one of the message talismans flying towards the Great Lake of Dragon Lake. Soon, it arrived in front of the main gate. Mengjin turned around and asked, "Master?" Sect leader Qin waved his horsetail whisk and in an instant, a message talisman appeared in the hall. The talisman landed in front of the stairs, and with a flash of light, a Taoist wearing a tall hat appeared. He bowed and said, "May I ask if you are the current sect master of the Dark Azure sect?" Sect leader Qin replied, "Yes, who are you?" The Taoist stood up and said seriously, "I am Ren Hong, the leader of the Honghe Temple." Although the other party called himself the sect master, not a single person stood up. Everyone could tell that it was merely a wisp of soul consciousness. As for this person's name, they had heard of him before. He was the last sect master of Honghe Temple, and he had passed away several thousand years ago. Sect leader Qin asked, "Honored sir has come here to see me?" The Taoist said, "The disciples of the Honghe Temple were unfilial, which led to the disaster of our sect. Our orthodoxy was cut off, and no one inherited the precious treasure of our sect. So this time..." At this point, he raised his head and said loudly, "I am willing to offer this to all the people in the world." Chapter 1159. Ren Hong seemed to have returned to Qinsong School to say these words. After he finished speaking, he cupped his hands towards Sect Master Qin and a faint smile appeared on his face. His figure slowly faded away and disappeared from the main hall. Mengjin thought for a moment, then turned his head and said, "Sect leader master, just now, I have taken a closer look. There are 33 talismans in total, and they are not in my family alone. Instead, they are distributed to the four corners. I believe that many sects in the Donghua continent, including the Devil's Clan, have heard of this news." Sun Jinren sneered and said, "The Honghe Monastery has been destroyed for thousands of years, but this sect leader is still restless after he passed away. He still wants to throw out the treasures and let the people of the world fight over them." Reverend Yen looked over and said, "Then, junior apprentice brother, do you think you should go up and compete?" Sun Jinren replied without hesitation, "Why wouldn't I fight for it? After all, it's an important treasure of the sect." If you don't get it, it might be taken away by Yu Xiao's side and become their helper. If the tribulation begins, wouldn't it be disadvantageous to me? The Honghe Monastery was not a small sect. It had a long history and was a large sect that came from the Western continent. Its sect-guarding magic treasure was not something an ordinary treasure could compare to. No matter which sect obtained it, they would immediately have a good bargaining chip in their hands. This time, the treasure was personally given by the sect leader. Even if he obtained it, it would be perfectly justifiable and he wouldn't need to bear any karma. Sect leader Qin looked to his right and said, "What does perfected Xiao think?" Perfected being Xiao pondered for a moment before replying, "The calamity is coming. As long as it doesn't hinder my great plan, I can do anything. Moreover, if the Qinsong school does not interfere in this matter, it will not be able to do anything about it. It doesn't make sense." Sect leader Qin nodded and looked at Zhang Yan. "What did Hall Master Du Jin say?" Zhang Yan smiled. He said, "The Honghe Temple has been silent for thousands of years. This small world wouldn't have opened for no reason. Someone must have done it. I heard that the Yuanyang sect has been looking for this world. This time, the place where the world opens is near the Qing River, so it must be related to it. However, if he succeeded, he would definitely think of ways to cover it up. It couldn't have caused such a commotion that the whole world would hear about it. Perhaps something unforeseen has happened." When the perfected persons heard this, they could not help but shake their heads and smile. It was not hard to imagine that the Yuanyang sect had planned to take this small world and all the treasures in it for themselves. But now he had outsmarted himself. Zhang Yan continued, "Among our allies, the number of treasures we have is less than that of the other side. Just as Sun Jinren said, even if I can't get it, I can't let Yu Xiao get it. Disciple believes that in the end, this matter needs to be discussed by all the sections. Only then will we be able to come to a conclusion." Qi Yuntian also agreed. He suggested, "Sect leader's spiritual master, disciple thinks that we can send a spiritual master to guard this place earlier." Shen Baishuang said, "Sect master and the hall masters must not act rashly. I'm willing." Zhang Yan nodded and said, "Zhenren Shen is indeed a suitable person." Shen Baishuang's seniority was high, and his cultivation was not weak either. With him speaking, the perfected persons naturally had no objections. Sect leader Qin said, "Then I'll have to trouble junior brother to go to the central continent." Shen Baishuang hurriedly stood up and said that he did not dare. 2 hours later, all the matters were discussed. 2 hours later, the perfected Dong Tian in the hall left. Zhang Yan reached the door but did not leave. After a while, a child came and said, "Perfected Zhang, sect leader invites you." Zhang Yan followed him to the back of the hall. Seeing sect leader Qin sitting on a cushion, he went forward and bowed before sitting down. Sect leader Qin asked, "Just now, I'm observing Hall Master Du Zhen's expression. It seems like he has something to say." Zhang Yan smiled and said, "Disciple does have something to say, but just now, when all the perfected persons are here, it's a little inconvenient." Sect leader Qin nodded and said, "There are only 2 of us here, so you can say it clearly." Zhang Yan looked a little serious and said, "Disciple thinks that this time, we can either fall out with Yu Xiao and fight for the treasure. Otherwise, with him and I restraining each other, neither of us can achieve what we want. If Yu Xiao supports Yuanyang to get the treasure, as long as our Qinsong school objects, it is equivalent to indirectly helping Yuanyang to win over this sect. Even if after the human tribulation, Yuanyang sect was unlikely to stand on the side of Qinsong, they might not be against it. At this time, it was unwise to take the initiative to push it into Yu Xiao's arms, and it was not something he wanted to see. Sect leader Qin said, "Since Hall Master Du Zhen has made this proposal, do you have a countermeasure?" Zhang Yan's eyes flickered slightly and he said, "Qinsong can't get it, and Yu Xiao can't get it, but it doesn't mean that we can't get it elsewhere. We might as well find a place for it." Sect leader Qin smiled and said, "I already know what Hall Master Du Zhen wants. Fine, let's do it according to your plan." Inside the mountain gate of Butian Pavilion, sect leader Tan Dingxian's face was gloomy as he watched the world's spiritual energy being sucked in by the open door. He sighed and said, It's obviously a sect that has been dead for thousands of years. Why is it jumping out now to join in the fun? What he hated the most was the appearance of things that were not under his control. In his opinion, the current world's sects should be like the sun, the moon, and the stars in the sky. Everyone should stay in their place and keep to their own duties. This was the right way to go. Bu Jingsu also felt bad and said, "Senior, this small world appeared at the wrong time. The world's spiritual energy is getting scarce day by day, and Qin Song and Yu Xiao are confronting each other. Perhaps in the near future, they will shed all pretense of cordiality and fight each other. Currently, the two sects are restraining themselves, but if they start fighting because of this, it will not be a blessing for the Eastern continent." Tan Dingxian's expression was heavy as he said, "We can only try our best to mediate. What's more hateful is that Honghe Temple even sent a message to the devil sect. I don't know what they want to do." Bu Jingsu's expression was strange as he said, "They probably resent me for not helping Honghe Temple when they were in danger." Tan Dingxian snorted and said, "Everything has its ups and downs. What's there to be angry about?" Bu Jingsu repeatedly agreed. In reality, he understood in his heart that if the same thing happened to the heaven-mending pavilion, then this senior disciple would have a different excuse. Tan Dingxian thought for a while and sighed, "It seems that this time, I still have to go personally. I just hope I can appease these two sections." At this time, in Yuan Yang sect, Spiritual Master Wen received the reply from the disciple he sent out. Only now did he know the whole story. It turned out that after the disciple received the order to go out, he quickly found the Qinghuai Chao clan and confirmed that their ancestors were indeed related to Honghe Temple. The clan had been worshipping a legendary immortal item for generations. He should have waited for the successor of Honghe Temple to appear before handing it over to him. However, for some reason, such a person had not appeared for a long time. As time passed, he naturally forgot about this matter and only treated this item as a more precious ancestral heirloom. When the item first came into his hands, the disciple couldn't believe that the item that the sect had been searching for so long had fallen into his hands so easily. But what happened next made him panic. This item actually borrowed a strand of his qi and opened an entrance to the boundary. Then, more than 30 message talismans flew in all directions. He couldn't even stop them in time. After this incident, he didn't even dare to return to his sect. He could only stay at the boundary and send back letters to report the details of the situation. At the same time, he also tried to defend himself. After Qiao Jingdao finished listening, he judged, "This disciple was innocently implicated. I thought that with the arrangement of Honghe Temple, only a person with some kind of secret technique would be able to open the door of the small world without any commotion. If other cultivators touched it, it would announce the spiritual opportunity and send out a message talisman. All cultivators in the world would know about it and no one would be able to keep it to themselves. In fact, with a great enemy outside, compared to finding a handsome disciple to inherit their Taoism, Honghe Temple's action was actually better to preserve their heritage. At least in the future, the sects that benefited from this sect would try to take care of the aftermath, just for the sake of their reputation." Spiritual Master Wen said with a serious expression, "All the sects have been alarmed. I believe that they will soon come to fight for this treasure. Righteous path, you go to the boundary first and try to guard the entrance. If something goes wrong, I will go to the sect leader to ask for forgiveness." Spiritual Master Wu stood up and said, "Senior sister, I will go with you." Spiritual Master Wen hesitated and said, "Junior sister, it is better for you to go with the righteous path to guard the entrance. You must know that this time, not only Shenmen will intervene, I am afraid that the devil sect will also take advantage of the situation." Spiritual Master Wu felt a chill in his heart and felt that this was reasonable. He could only say, "This matter has come to this point, it is not your fault. Sect leader Jinren is reasonable and will not blame you." Spiritual Master Wen shook his head and said, "Blame is a small matter. I am afraid that I will have to face a difficult problem." She came out of the cave and walked to the front of Diwen Jingxin Hall. Her qi dynamic immediately caused the bell and drum to ring. A boy immediately came out and said, "Sect leader invites spiritual master into the hall to talk." Spiritual Master Wen entered the hall and after bowing to Chu Rui, he described the matter. After listening, Chu Rui said, "This is not your fault. Honghe Temple's arrangement looks simple but it is very difficult to break. I think they have planned this long ago." Spiritual Master Wen said, "Sect leader Shi Xiang, then what should I do later?" Chu Rui looked outside the hall and said, "The treasure is secondary. Qin Song and Yuxiao families are likely to use this matter to force me to make a choice." Spiritual Master Wen looked slightly nervous and said, "Then what should we do?" Chu Rui smiled and waved his hand, saying, "Don't panic. It is not that easy to make Yuan Yang sect submit." At this moment, a boy outside the door said, "Yuxiao School Spiritual Master Wu is here. He said that he wants to see sect leader Jinren." Chu Rui said lightly, "He is fast. Invite him up." Spiritual Master Wen suggested, "Sect leader Shi Xiang, should we wait until after Qin Song School comes?" Chu Rui smiled and said, "You want to wait for the two families to come here and use the conflict between them to restrict each other so that Yuan Yang sect can benefit from it?" He shook his head and said, "This is only a small plan, it will not affect the overall situation." He waved his sleeve, and the boy outside the hall bowed and left to pass on the order. Not long after, a Taoist wearing a green robe walked in. He glanced around the hall and bowed with a smile, saying, "Yuxiao Wu Fenggu, greets sect leader Chu and spiritual master Wen." Chu Rui raised his hand and bowed back, saying with a smile, "Is spiritual master Wu here to get the treasure?" Wu Fenggu shook his head and said, "I am afraid sect leader Chu is wrong." He raised his head and looked at Chu Rui with bright eyes, saying, "I, Yuxiao, know that Yuan Yang sect has been searching for the treasure of Honghe Temple for thousands of years and has made many things out of your mind. Now that the treasure has appeared, it is something that your sect should get. Therefore, I am here to help you get the treasure." To be continued. Chapter 1160. After Shen Baishuang came out of the hall, he went back to the cave abode to give some instructions. On the same day, he rode the pagoda out of the mountain gate and headed towards the place where the spiritual light bloomed in Zhongzhou. After half a day, he arrived at the shore of Qing River. He looked up and saw that there seemed to be a hole in the sky. The spiritual vigor surged into it, and the swirling air mass spread out for dozens of miles. There were flashes of lightning from time to time, and the sound was incessant. He silently sensed that the person who opened up the small world had already thought of this. The inside was vast and deep, and it could accommodate all the clones of the Dongtian from various sections. It should not be a big problem, so he drove the pagoda and rushed in. Although he was walking up, the moment he entered, he felt like he was sinking, and there was a feeling of heaven and earth turning upside down. After a while, the pagoda shook as if a layer of air barrier was broken, and he was already inside the border. Looking around, there were hundreds of floating peaks, and there was a spring waterfall washing down, like a crystal curtain hanging in the sky, straight into a bottomless abyss. As he was looking, there was a rainbow in front of him, and it stopped a few miles away. A petite female cultivator came out, and she bowed and said, "Jinren Shun from Qinsong School has arrived. Greetings." Shen Baishuang returned the greeting and said, "Jinren Wu, greetings." Jinren Wu raised her wrist, pointed to a floating peak not far away, and said, "Jinren Shen, the Yuan Yang sect has built a few altars here, and that one is for your sect. This time, the treasure is born, and it cannot be decided by one sect. Why don't we wait for the other Taoist friends to arrive, and then we can make a decision. What do you think, Jinren Shen?" Shen Baishuang could tell that the Yuan Yang sect was obviously claiming to be the owner of this place, but he didn't care about it at all. After all, the ultimate treasure of the Honghe Taoist sect was not something that could be decided just by doing this. Therefore, Shen Baishuang didn't reject the Yuan Yang sect's request. He just nodded and turned around. After he landed on the mountain peak, he drove away all the servants and maids that the Yuan Yang sect had arranged here and went into the tower to cultivate. About a day later, there was a voice outside the door. "Jinren Shun, is it convenient? Ping Du Wu Wei is here to pay his respects." When Shen Baishuang heard that, he retreated from his meditation. Now that the Ping Du sect followed the lead of the Qinsong school, He had already expected the visit of the Grotto Heaven sect's cultivator. He opened the pagoda's door and said, "Taoist Wu, please come in and sit." Perfected Master Wu and Shen Baishuang could be considered old acquaintances. When they arrived at the pagoda, they exchanged some pleasantries before getting down to business. He asked, "Does your sect want this treasure?" Shen Baishuang said, "I also want to, but Yu Xiao will certainly not allow it. Unless our two families fight it out first, there won't be a result, and now is not the right time." Enlightened Master Wu nodded repeatedly to show that he understood. Then he said in a deep voice, "If your esteemed sect can't get it, then you won't let Yu Xiao get it. Who knows who will benefit from it in the end?" Shen Baishuang said, "This advantage is not easy to take. If we handle this appropriately, we won't necessarily suffer a loss." Enlightened Master Wu was curious and said, "Then what do you mean, Zhenren Shen?" Shen Baishuang did not say it out loud. Instead, he transmitted a few words to Shen Baishuang. Shen Baishuang was surprised after listening to it. He thought for a while and said, "Zhenren Shen, rest assured. I know what to do." After getting the answer, he sat for a while. Then he left. 2 hours later, Huanzhen Temple Zhenrenpang also came to visit the pagoda. After a discussion with Shen Baishuang, they stopped at a floating peak not far from here. Another day passed. A Yuan Yang disciple came outside the pagoda and said, "Zhenren Shen, my sect's Zhenren invites you." Shen Baishuang drove the pagoda and followed the disciple's guidance to the front of a large peak. Yuan Yang sect had only been in this small realm for a day or two, but because they saw themselves as the host, they built a large platform here. Therefore, a large platform was built here, and many flying palaces and buildings were moved here to decorate it. The surrounding clouds were thick and the mist was vast and indistinct. He looked around and saw Yuan Yang sect's Zhenren Wen and Zhenren Wu standing on the platform and bowing to him. He returned the bow from afar and descended. At the same time, there were rays of spiritual light and clear qi coming over. It was the Zhenrens from various sections. They rode on flying boats, spiritual birds, and strange leaves. They arrived at the peak and after greeting Zhenren Wen, they all landed on the peak. Shen Baishuang looked over and saw that out of the 10 sects of Xian men, 8 had arrived. Only Shaoqing and Lishan sect had not arrived. Shaoqing sect's whereabouts were hard to pinpoint. They might come or they might not, so there was no need to investigate. As for Lishan sect, after Zhenren Yuling left, no one had entered the heavenly abode state. There was no hope of obtaining the treasure, so it made no difference whether they came or not. At this moment, no one from the 6 demonic sects had arrived. He did not know if the talisman from the demonic sects had other reasons, or if they knew that they could not compete with Xianmen, so they gave up on the idea. Zhenren Wen stood at the top of the platform and looked around at the people from the various sections. He said, "All of you Zhenrens have received the talisman from Honghe sect and are here for the treasure. We can decide who will get their hands on this treasure later. Before that, I need to make one thing clear. Honghe Temple was originally a sect of my Xian sect. Its sect's precious treasure should not fall into the hands of the devil sect. Therefore, I would like to make an agreement with everyone. If the devil sect comes, I hope that my Xian sect can join hands to chase them away." Wu Fenggu laughed and said loudly, "Zhenren Wen is right. Since our Xian men treasure is here, we cannot let the demonic sects steal it. Otherwise, we will lose face. If they come, I, Yu Xiao, am willing to help chase them away." When he spoke, Taihao, Ninhua, and Butian all expressed their agreement. This was to target the demonic sects and exclude them. Shen Baishuang would not stop them and nodded in agreement. Wu Zhen immediately agreed. As for Zhenren Pang, since they were dealing with the demonic sects, as a cultivator of the Huanzhen sect, she would not be polite and agreed. Zhenren Wen said, "My Origin Yang disciples have searched the inner realm for the past 2 days and have found the treasure, but they don't dare to take it." Everyone, as she spoke to this point, there was a sudden rumble from outside. However, just as the sound entered the hearts of the crowd, it suddenly disappeared without a trace, as if it had been erased halfway through. All the Taoist Grotto Heaven felt that just now, there were at least 2 forces colliding. It was obvious that cultivators of the same generation were fighting in the outer realm. They were a bit surprised. Who would do something like this at a time like this? When he looked outside, he saw a flash of light at the realm gate. A woman wearing a tight-fitting robe with a collared collar came in. Her face was beautiful and her eyes were bright. Her hair was combed into 2 buns and she was wearing a plain, thin dress. Around her was a dot of sword light that twinkled like a star. Even though she was not moving, it was obvious that she was filled with killing intent. So it's Taoist Lu from the Shaoqing sect. When everyone saw this female cultivator, they immediately recognized her. They all had different thoughts and guessed why she was here. Wu Fenggu thought, in the past, when treasures appeared in the continent, the Shaoqing sect never cared about them. Why are they here now? Do they also want to steal the treasure? The woman came closer and bowed. Lu Shirong greets fellow Taoists of the Taoist sects. Everyone didn't dare to be careless and returned the greeting. At this time, Tan Dingxian asked, Spiritual Master Le, may I ask, did you have a conflict with someone with a commotion outside just now? Taoist Le casually said, nothing, but just now, I chased a Taoist master of the demonic sect here and killed him in front of the realm gate. Tan Dingxian was shocked. Oh. If this leaf is removed, this golden branch will need tens of thousands of years of spiritual opportunity to be transformed before it can regain its original appearance. When Taoist Master Shi of Taihao School arrived, he did not care about the golden branch. Instead, he stared at the strange tree. There was a slight excitement in his expression. He pondered for a while and walked out. He stood in front and bowed deeply to everyone. He said, Fellow Taoists, Tahao, know that I am not virtuous and dare not fight for the precious branch. I only wish to get the tree under my feet. That is enough. I hope that fellow Taoists can fulfill my wish. Chapter 1161. Zhenren Shi gave up on the treasure and took the initiative to ask for the strange wood. Most of the people present were happy to see this happen. As for whether or not there was anything special about the wood, they did not want to find out. In today's world, only Taihao School had the deepest understanding of this art. It was useless for other cultivators to take it. Zhenren Wen and Zhenren Wu secretly communicated with each other through telepathy. They thought that it was fine to give up the wood. Even if they could not get the treasure from Honghe Temple, at least they would owe them a favor. So he said, Zhenren Shi, Yuan Yang sect does not want this wood. What do you think? Wu Fenggu smiled and said, in my opinion, Zhenren Shi's request is not too much. Zhenren Wu hesitated and said, Zhenren Shen, what do you think? Shen Baishuang thought for a while. The cultivation method of Taihao School was closely related to the few divine woods in the sect. To him, the heavenly golden branch was not necessarily more useful than the strange wood. However, he had no reason to stop this. Even if he did, it would not be good for him to say anything. So he said, I have no objection. Zhenren Wu thought to himself, Taihao School could not get the treasure. It seems that they are taking a step back, but it is actually a bargain. Seeing that no one objected, Zhenren Shi was secretly happy. However, Zhenren Lu of Shaoqing sect did not say anything, so he could not pretend that he did not hear it. So he asked, Zhenren Lu, what do you think? But as soon as he said it, he regretted it immediately. Zhenren Lu said, are you asking me? If I say that Zhenren Shi wants the wood, so what if you win the sword in my hand? Zhenren Shi was shocked. This, Zhenren Lu blinked his beautiful eyes and said, I was just joking. He said, I was just joking. Could it be that Zhenren took it seriously? I don't want that strange rattan wood. Zhenren Shi's lips moved, but he did not know what to say. Just now, looking at Zhenren Li's serious face, he did not think that she was joking at all. He felt that he could not figure out this woman's temperament, so he did not dare to provoke her anymore. Everyone bowed deeply and said, thank you, fellow Taoists. I can't thank you enough. After saying that, he didn't say anything else and silently retreated to the side. Enlightened Master Wen turned around and said, fellow Taoists, why don't we discuss the ownership of the golden branch? After a moment of silence, Tan Dingxian said, although Honghe Temple is willing to give its treasures to our fellow Taoists under the heavens, precious treasures are rare, and not everyone can have their wishes fulfilled. In my humble opinion, fellow Taoist of Primordial Yang sect has inherited Honghe Temple's spirit cave, and the appearance of the small portal was also done by fellow Taoist of Primordial Yang sect, so this treasure should belong to him. What do you think? When Taoist Master Pang heard this, she frowned and said, Sect Master Tan. The reason why we are here today is because of the talisman left behind by Ren Hong, the sect leader of Honghe Temple. Isn't it a little inappropriate for you to overrule the will of your predecessor with just a sentence? Tan Dingxian sighed and said, Taoist Pang, you should be able to understand. If there is a dispute, no one is allowed. It will inevitably ruin the harmony of our celestial sect of wonders. This is a move that does not make up for the losses. Taoist Master Pang shook her head and said, there is always a way to satisfy both sides. Taoist Master Exen interrupted and said, oh, then I would like to hear Taoist Master Pang's so-called way to satisfy both sides. If what you say makes sense, then it's fine. Taoist Master Pang looked up and said, if it really doesn't work, then we will follow the sword fighting method, and each sect will send out their disciples to fight to determine the ownership. As soon as he said this, Taoist Master Lu, who seemed to be indifferent to this, suddenly said, this is a good idea. Everyone couldn't help but hesitate. This method could be said to avoid direct competition between the Taoist masters of Dongtian, and it was indeed suitable for the current situation. In this way, the treasure could fall into the hands of any sect. Although the three sects had a higher chance of winning, they still had hope. Therefore, they were also tempted. Wu Fenggu felt that something was wrong. He came back here to show that he supported Yuan Yang sect in obtaining the treasure, and he wanted to use this favor to win them over. However, if this matter was decided by the disciples of each sect, then Yuan Yang sect would not need to rely on Yu Xiao at all, and they could fight on their own. Then, his previous plan would be completely useless. At this moment, his mind turned quickly, and he immediately came up with a countermeasure. He raised his arm and said loudly, everyone, I think this is inappropriate. He looked at Taoist Master Pang and said, Taoist Master Pang, have you forgotten about the 6 demonic sects? Yes, this time they were killed by Taoist Master Lu, but with Ren Hong's talisman as proof, they still have the status. If they hear about this matter and also send their disciples to fight for it, should we stop them? Unfortunately, the treasure will fall into the hands of the demonic sects, and I don't think this is what everyone wants. At this point, he laughed coldly and said, as for Sect Master Ren's actions, I think it is extremely inappropriate. It's not that I'm disrespectful to the ancestors, but he doesn't distinguish between the mystical and demonic, good and evil, and actually passed on the sect's treasure. For a sect to be like this, one can imagine what kind of situation the sect was in. No wonder this sect was destroyed so early in the past. If it was still around, Yu Xiao would definitely attack it. Shen Baishuang looked at him coldly. How could he not see through Wu Fenggu's plan? He wanted to ruin Ren Hong's reputation, and then he would be able to make his own arrangements. However, when Ren Hong passed on the talisman, he didn't care about the mystical and demonic sections. This lack of consideration would indeed cause people to criticize him, but there was no way to tell. At this time, enlightened Master Wu looked over, and Shen Baishuang nodded slightly to him. Enlightened Master Wu coughed and stood up, saying, everyone, please listen to me. When everyone's gazes turned to him, he said, if this heavenly beauty golden branch was placed tens of thousands of years ago, when all 7 leaves were present, it wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that it was the sect's treasure. But now, only 1 leaf remains, and its power is actually limited. Why fight over it and hurt the harmony between the sects for no reason? Tan Dingxian agreed this time, saying, indeed, for a mere treasure, it really isn't worth it. Enlightened Master Exen said, since Enlightened Master Wu says so, you must have some other wise opinion? Enlightened Master Wu bowed slightly and said, I don't dare. I just have some shallow opinions. Everyone here, every sect has a treasure to guard their mountain gate. Among the 10 sects of the Xianmen, only Lishan sect doesn't have such a treasure. Thus, in these years, we have been repeatedly attacked by the demonic sects, both in the open and in the dark. Even the lower sects have rebelled incessantly, and I can't bear it. Seeing that we're all from the same path as Xianmen, I only have one suggestion. Why don't we give this treasure to Li Shan? Wu Fenggu heard this. He first frowned, but then slowly relaxed, thinking to himself, rather than being entangled with Qinsong, this can be considered a solution. On the surface, Li Shan's sect hadn't leaned towards any side. Furthermore, there was no one from the heavenly grotto overseeing the sect. Even if this treasure fell into their hands, it wouldn't be a threat to any side. Moreover, this way the open conflict would turn into a secret fight, and they could think of a way to rope them into their own side. As for whether this was a secret agreement between Li Shan's sect and Qinsong school, it wasn't impossible. But in his opinion, this was also simple. They could make some harsh agreements to ensure that Li Shan's sect couldn't be used by Qinsong. Thus, he said, Spiritual Master Wu is right. We are all of Xianmen, so we should support each other. However, this isn't a small matter. Li Shan's sect doesn't have any friends here today, so it isn't good to make a decision for them. Why don't we put this aside and discuss it another day? Shen Baishuang thought about it and nodded. Then let's do it this way. Since the two sects had come to an agreement, the others naturally wouldn't voice out their objections. In the end, this heavenly golden branch only had one leaf left, and it was more threatening than practical. As for growing another leaf after 10,000 years, the three major sects had only been around for a little over 10,000 years. With that much time, they would have long ago found a way to refine a more powerful and suitable Dharma treasure. The most important thing was that there was another treasure here, and just now, it could be considered an important treasure. Spiritual Master Xen bowed and said, Since this item has been decided, why don't we decide who the remaining treasure belongs to? When enlightened Master Wen saw everyone looking at him, he said, Fellow Taoists, please follow me. After he finished speaking, he boarded the carriage and headed in a certain direction. Everyone got on their chariots and followed. After traveling for several hours, a floating altar appeared in front of them. There were stairs on all four sides, and it was round on the outside and square on the inside, like a coin. In the middle of the altar, there was a beautiful painting floating in the air. The shaft was exposed, and it was dragged out for a few feet, floating in the air. On the surface of the painting, there were all sorts of stars. However, one moment it looked like this, and the next moment it looked different. It was constantly changing, as though it was showing the movement of the universe. This was the famous treasure of Honghe Monastery, the splendid painting of Zhikong. Although Zhu Zhen had heard of it, he didn't know its specific uses. According to rumors, it could activate the heaven and earth Weili. However, even when Honghe Monastery was on the verge of destruction, they never used this treasure, and no one knew why. This time, Wu Fenggu didn't decline and took the initiative to say, I heard that this treasure is very powerful, and we can't just leave it to others. How about this? For 100 years, the 9 sects of Xianmen will take turns to control it. Wu Zhenren snorted and said, Then which sect will take first? Wu Fenggu said seriously, This item was found first by the primordial Yang sect. According to reason, the primordial Yang sect will naturally take charge of it first. Wu Zhenren snorted, and his eyes were filled with disdain. It was said that they would take turns to control it, but how could it really be done? They could just find an excuse to delay it. This was clearly an agreement between Yu Xiao and primordial Yang. Once the treasure fell into their hands, they would never be able to get it out again. Moreover, in a few decades, the Qinsong school would launch the human tribulation. What was the difference between giving it to the other party at this time and giving it to them? At that moment, Yu Shirong waved her hand and took the golden map over. She then threw it into the sachet and said, Since it's the turn of the sects, let's leave the 100-year-old one in the Shaoqing sect. After she finished speaking, she threw it into the sachet. Zhenren saw that she didn't act according to common sense at all and immediately messed up his own plan. She couldn't help but be slightly angry and said, Zhenren Lu, doesn't your sect always ask for the way of the sword? Why do you want to take such a treasure? Yu Shirong glanced at her, as if she was a little confused about why she asked this question, so she replied seriously, No reason. I just see that this painting is exquisite and I like it very much. It can be used to decorate the cave. After 100 years, I think I'll get tired of looking at it. At that time, you can take it, I won't fight with you. To be continued. Chapter 1162. Shen Baishuang sneered. Just now, when Le Shirong attacked, Perfected One had clearly seen it. If she thought that it was inappropriate, she could have stopped her at that time. Why would she say anything later? But not only her, even the Perfected Ones did not come forward to stop her. The reason was that when Perfected Lu came just now, his act of killing the people from the Devil sect had caused everyone present to either fear or respect him. They were unwilling to fight with him. Perfected One also knew that if she continued to chase after him, she would most likely have a sword battle with this Shaoqing female cultivator to determine the result. She gritted her teeth, but there was nothing she could do. She could not help but glance at Wu Fenggu. Although the Yuanyang sect had its own plan and didn't want to join the Jade Cloud sect's boat so easily, but if they didn't rely on the Jade Cloud sect, it would be hard for them to gain any advantage in front of this Master Lu+++. Wu Fenggu was much more cautious this time. He did not speak immediately, but looked at Perfected Lu, as if trying to determine her true intentions. Although the Yuxiao sect had always suspected that the Shaoqing sect and the Qinsong were close, Master Lingyou was in charge of this matter. He did not want to offend the Shaoqing sect when he was uncertain. However, he was a little regretful at this moment. The Shaoqing sect had always kept their word and disdained to deny it. If they said that they would return after 100 years, they would definitely return. Just now, he had set the time limit a little too long. He pondered for a moment and transmitted his voice. Zhenren Wen, since Zhenren Le has the Jikong painting in her hands, she would never take it out unless there's a sword duel. Perhaps this is her motive. However, there's still room for negotiation. We can sign a contract with her later. 100 years later, we'll definitely return the treasure to your sect. Perfected One sneered in her heart, but she did not believe him. It would be fine if they could get the Jikong painting, but it was 100 years later. Yu Xiao was doing them a favor now. If they accepted it, wouldn't they be tied up for 100 years? Moreover, no matter what, the longer it was delayed, the more variables there would be. Who knew what would happen then? Wu Fenggu did not look at her, he only clasped his hands towards the distance. He said, Zhenren Lu, since you've taken a liking to this treasure, we don't have to fight for it anymore. But since we've agreed that each family will be in charge for 100 years, we'll have to make a contract. What do you think? Le Shirong thought about it and said, if I don't do it, will I not be able to take this treasure map away? Wu Fenggu hastily said, Reverend's words are too serious. It's not that we don't trust your esteemed sect, it's just that our fellow Taoists and I were sent here by the sect. Now that the matter has been settled, we must return with an explanation. Although the rules of each sect are different, empty words ultimately do not have much persuasive power. I hope you can understand our difficulties. Lu Shirong said, You, the Reverend, speak very strangely. I'll do it. Why do I need to be considerate of you? Wu Fenggu coughed. He had to be careful when speaking to this enlightened being. He was afraid that he would say something wrong and put himself in a difficult position. At this moment, he could only say against his will, Zhenren Lu is indeed reasonable. Shen Baishuang interrupted, Zhenren Wu, about the contract, we can postpone it for a few more days. When the fellow Taoists from Lishan sect arrive, the ownership of the two treasures will be decided. Fellow Taoists can also be witnesses. Wu Fenggu agreed, you're right, Zhenren Shen. We're all here with our avatars, we won't delay anything. How about we discuss it in a few days? Everyone agreed. Seeing that there was nothing else, they were about to leave when Tan Dingxian suddenly raised his head and said loudly, Everyone, please stay here for a while. I have something to say. Everyone was surprised. Zhenren Shi and Exen looked at Wu Fenggu and saw that he was expressionless. They pondered for a moment and stood still. Shen Baishuang looked at them and did not move. Tan Dingxian looked around and cupped his hands. He said solemnly, Fellow Taoists, the spiritual vigor of the 9 continents has greatly declined. If we allow this border pass to continue absorbing spiritual vigor, it will not be a good thing for us Taoists. Jinren suddenly had a bad feeling. Sect leader Tan said, "We are here for the treasures of Honghe School. Since these two items have already been taken over by someone else, we can take them out first. Later on, we will destroy this small world so that the spiritual vigor of this place can be returned to the 9 continents." When Jinren heard this, he frowned. It was obvious that this small world was left behind by Honghe sect to revive the sect. Although the 2 sect-guarding treasures in the world were now taken, there must be many treasures left in the world. It was just that they did not have the time to search for them in the past 2 days. This time, because of Shaoqing and Qinsong's obstruction, Yuanyang sect did not get any benefits. She still hoped that this small world could make up for it a little. How could she bear to abandon it? She took a breath and said, "Sect leader Tan, I know that the spiritual vigor is declining, but why are you in such a hurry? Can't we delay it for some time?" However, sect leader Tan did not relent at all. He said righteously, "One more day of delay means one more portion of spiritual vigor in the 9 continents. For the sake of the world, I hope your sect will not delay and take action as soon as possible." Jinren was annoyed. What for the spiritual vigor of the 9 continents? It was just a nice way to put it. If there was a sect in the world that did not take this seriously, it would be Qinsong School, which had a total of 14 enlightened masters. But even so, Butian Pavilion did not dare to find trouble with them. Why did they have to make things difficult for Yuanyang sect? She wanted to call for help, but when she looked around, she saw that everyone looked indifferent, as if this matter did not concern them. Unexpectedly, no one was willing to speak up for Yuanyang sect. She could not help but feel her heart sink. She suddenly realized that Yuanyang sect was outside of the other sections. Although it was aloof, once it was involved in any trouble, no one would help it. It could be said that it was alone. Tan Dingxian saw that she did not speak, so he continued, "Since Jinren is not speaking, I will take it that you have agreed. This time, I have brought a realm-breaking treasure, so there is no need for your sect to take action." Then he bowed to everyone and said, "Please leave this world. If I have offended you in any way, I hope you will forgive me." Seeing that he was not just talking and was really going to take action, Jinren hurriedly said, "Sect leader Tan, please wait. The heavenly golden branch and the vine are still in this world." Tan Dingxian immediately said, "That is simple. Jinren sure has to take the vine anyway. Why don't you take it out now? When Li Mountain sect arrives, you can give it to them." Shen Baishuang watched with cold eyes. He did not speak, and Jinren Wu and Jinren Pang were also silent. The matter in front of them had nothing to do with them, so naturally, they would not go against Yu Xiao's side. Jinren had no choice but to send a message to Wu Fenggu. "Jinren Wu, this small world is useful for my Yuanyang sect. Can you put in a few words for me? I will remember this favor." Wu Fenggu nodded at her and said, "Sect leader Tan, all the fellow Taoists are here. Why do you have to chase them away? As long as we break this small world, the spiritual vigor that we've swallowed over the past few days can still be returned. It's not a big deal to delay for a while." Tan Dingxian looked troubled, as if she was struggling. Finally, she sighed heavily and said, "All right. Once the contract is signed, we must break this small world." Shen Baishuang said, "Since there is nothing else, I will take my leave." He bowed and left the pagoda. As he moved, the Jinren of the sects also left. In the end, only Wu Fenggu, Jinren Wen, and Jinren Wu were still standing there. Jinren Wen came up and bowed deeply. "Thank you, Jinren Wu, for helping us out. The two of us thank you." Wu Fenggu smiled and said, "Jinren Wu, there is no need to be resentful. If I say that I am willing to make a bet with Jinren Shaoqing Lu, if I win by luck and get the Jikong map back, will your sect form an alliance with us?" Jinren Wen and Jinren Wu were stunned, but they could not answer. Wu Fenggu looked at them and said, "Do you think I, Yu Xiao, do not know what your sect is thinking? Today, I am here not to ask for your sect to join Yu Xiao immediately, but to let your sect see my sincerity." He raised his sleeves and cupped his hands, saying, "Anyway, there is still a long way to go. The two of you, farewell." When he finished, he stepped onto the cloud raft and left. Jinren Wu looked at the cloud raft and said, "Senior Marshal Sister, This Jinren Wu's way of doing things is very different from the cultivators of Zhou sect. Jinren Wen sighed and said, "It's a pity that Wu Riang Jinren Wu is dead. Wu's words in Yuxiao sect are getting weaker and weaker." She lowered her head and thought for a while, then said, "Junior martial sister, if there is a war between Qinsong School and Yuxiao School, who do you think has a higher chance of winning?" Jinren Wu thought for a while and said, "I can't say for sure. Although there are only 2 sects on good terms with Qinsong School, there are 14 Jinren in each sect. What's more, Jinren Zhang tore up the contract at PG Palace, so there might be more in the future. In fact, I have a higher chance of winning. On the surface, it looks like we are evenly matched." Jinren Wen nodded and said, "That's right. With Yuan Yang sect's current strength, whichever sect we join will have a higher chance of winning. That's why they are forcing me to join them." Jinren Wu said, "But didn't sect head senior martial brothers say that this is not the right time? We can't see what the 2 sects are planning. If we join them rashly, it will be hard to turn back if we make the wrong move." Jinren Wen shook his head and said, "I used to think the same way. I thought Yuan Yang only needed to be impartial, so I could defend myself. But today, I deeply feel that Yuan Yang is like a boat on a stormy sea, and there are only 2 ways in front of us. If you don't choose, one mistake and the boat will be destroyed, and you will be overturned." Wu Fenggu had returned to the place where the Dharma carriage was originally parked. Seeing that sect head Tan was already waiting for him, he invited him to sit on the cloud raft and said, "This time I have to thank sect head Tan." Tan Dingxian said, "Don't mention it. If it weren't for Yu Xiao's help, Butian Pavilion would have fallen to the ground long ago. These small things are not worth mentioning." She paused and then asked, "Do you want to pressure him a little more?" Wu Fenggu shook his head and said with a smile, "No need. Pressing him too much is not appropriate. I believe that after this incident, Yuan Yang sect will understand that if you wander around on both sides, you will end up with nothing. Right now, he still has a choice. That's because Qinsong School and I can still tolerate him. If one day we can't tolerate him anymore, then we will have to make the decision for him." Chapter 1163. When Li Mountain learned that the Zenrins of the various sects had assigned a treasure to their sect, Sect Master Shin Zixin had to stop her seclusion and personally went to receive the treasure. A few days later, she entered the small world pass. There were no setbacks during this trip. She successfully obtained the treasure and made an agreement with the Zenrins of the various sections. Li Mountain sect could only use the treasure to defend the mountain gate. Regardless of the situation in the future, it could not be used against the Xianmen. If there was a need, and the various sects agreed, they could request for her to use the treasure against the enemy. Under normal circumstances, no sect would allow their sect's treasure to be restricted like this. However, Li Mountain sect did not have a Dong Tian Jinren, so they did not have much confidence. Having a treasure to defend the mountain gate was already good enough. Therefore, they could only agree. Returning to the flower boat, Shin Zixin did not show any joy. The disciple who followed her this time was her second disciple, Han Yunxia. Having followed her for hundreds of years, she was very familiar with her master's temperament. Sensing her heavy heart, she asked carefully, "Master, is it not good to bring the treasure this time?" Shin Zixin sighed and said, "The reason why I didn't go earlier was because the Li Mountain sect is not able to control such a treasure. I wanted to avoid it, but the more I avoided it, the more it came to me. Since all the sects have agreed, I have no choice but to accept it. However, I heard that the people from the demon sect were killed by Jinren Shaoqing Lu outside. They may not be satisfied. If they hear that Li Mountain sect has returned with the treasure, they will most likely try to kill us." Han Yunxia's face turned pale. "Then the person who insisted on giving the treasure to Li Mountain sect, is he trying to harm me?" Shin Zixin shook her head. "Based on what I know, the person who suggested this is Jinren Wu of Pingdu sect. I believe that this is the intention of Jinren Shin of Qinsong School. This Jinren has no good intentions towards me, nor does he have evil intentions. His goal is to prevent Yuan Yang or Yu Xiao from obtaining the treasure." Han Yunxia panicked. Then why not ask for Jinren Shin's help?" Shin Zixin shook her head. "It wasn't easy to ask for help. She was the sect leader now. As the sect master, no matter which sect she went to, it would give others the impression that she was leaning towards one side. Lee Mountain sect was now struggling to survive in the cracks. The crux was that they did not have enough power and influence. How can other sects value you? Deep in her heart, she was actually leaning towards Chinsong school. Firstly, it was because of the instructions given by the Yuling patriarch before his ascension. Secondly, it was because Yu Xiao school prioritized profit. Even if she were to side with them now, she was afraid that she would only be used. Once they had lost their value, they would be kicked away. After some consideration, she said, "I've decided. I won't ask for a single family." What? Han Yunxia was shocked. She thought for a moment and said, "Master, why don't we ask Jinren Wei to come and escort us? He is a disciple of Jinren Zhang of Chinsong School. With him, the cultivators of the devil sect will not dare to attack us." Xin Zi was tempted. However, he soon discarded this thought and said resolutely, "No, there's no need for that. I, Mount Li, will not return to beg anyone." Han Yunxia said anxiously, "Master." Xin Zixin raised her hand and stopped her from speaking again. "All right, go and cultivate. We'll return to the mountain tomorrow." Han Yunxia had no choice but to bow and say yes. Xin Zixin first wrote a letter and sent it to the mountain gate. She ordered that no one should leave the mountain no matter what. Everything would be handled after she returned. She then took out the divine beauty golden branch. She touched the flowers and leaves on it and carefully sensed it for a moment. She shook her head and put it back. This golden branch could be refined even by cultivators who had just entered the path of Tao. However, the time needed was different. Jinren Dongtian only needed 2 to 4 hours. For cultivators like her who were yuanying, it would take at least several months or even years. Unfortunately, one more day, this small world would be broken. Otherwise, she could have stayed here and refined the golden branch before bringing it back. On the second day, she boarded the flower boat and left the small world, returning to the mountain gate. At the same time, Jinren Xian and Jinren Shi hid in the clouds and watched her leave. Jinren Shi said, "The devil sect did not succeed this time. They will not be satisfied. On the way back from Mount Li, they will definitely be coveted. Once the people of the devil sect succeed, fellow Taoist and I can go and snatch it back." Jinren Xian said, "Even if we take it back, according to the contract, it should be returned to Mount Li. Then what's the use of this? Are you thinking of selling a favor to Mount Li sect? Right now, they don't even have a grotto heaven cultivator. They say they are on the same level as us, but they are only relying on the Jade Tomb Patriarch. They are not worthy of being roped in by us." Jinren Shi smiled. "It should be returned. However, if Sect Master Shen is injured and there is no one to support the sect, how can we protect this treasure? As fellow Taoists, we should help guard it for a few days to prevent it from being taken by the devil sect. Isn't this what we should do?" Jinren Xian did not agree immediately. Instead, he asked, "Does Jinren Wu know what you are doing?" Jinren Shi shook his head. "Jinren Wu doesn't know." Jinren Xian took a step back. He bowed and said, "Then forgive me for not being able to travel with you. However, with your ability, I believe you can defeat the invaders from the devil sect." It was not that he cared about Wu Fenggu's opinion. Instead, he thought that even if he succeeded, it would only benefit Taihao School. It would not benefit Nanhua sect at all. There was no need for him to worry about it. Huang Yugong was good friends with this Jinren Shi, but he was not. He was even wary of this person. Jinren Shi laughed. He pointed to the south and said, "Hold on, Taoist friend. Although I did not receive Jinren Wu's order this time, I was entrusted by someone else." Jinren Xian's heart skipped a beat. He asked, "Who?" Jinren Shi said meaningfully, "The family that is in charge of Yu Xiao is not Wu." After deciding on the ownership of the 2 treasures, he immediately wrote a letter to Yu Xiao sect. This was because he knew that the matter of Yu Xiao would still be decided by Zhou. As for Wu, she could be respectful on the surface, but she did not need to take it too seriously. As expected, Zhou replied to him that day. She politely asked him to escort the people from Lishan sect back to the mountain so that the treasures of Xianmen would not be taken away by the devil sect. After Taoist Xian knew that this matter was under the care of Yuxiao sect, his attitude changed instantly. He no longer insisted on his own opinion. He said, "If this is the case, I will go with you." Xin Zixin had only left for half a day when she suddenly heard a collapsing sound behind her. She lifted the curtain and turned around to take a look. She saw that the spiritual light of the small world in the sky had been broken. An immeasurable amount of spiritual vigor had dispersed into heaven and earth. She was closer to it. She felt like her Dharmakaya was bathed in the rain and her spirit was refreshed. However, at this moment, she became even more vigilant. With the spiritual vigor in chaos, it would be the right time for someone to attack. She shouted, "Disciples, look after the prohibition. Do not be distracted." She was not wrong. Not long after she looked after the prohibition, the entire flower boat shook violently as though it had crashed into a layer of black fog. It continuously eroded the prohibition in all directions. Before this, there were no signs at all. At this moment, she was still calm. This flower boat was personally refined by Zhenren Yuling back then. The people of Dongtian would not be able to withstand it. If it was just a clone, they could still handle it. After a moment, the other party seemed to have realized that if this continued, even if they used a few days of effort, they would not be able to break the barrier outside the flower boat. Hence they stopped. The black fog disappeared completely in an instant. Shen Zixin was still vigilant. She did not believe that the other party would give up so easily. There should be a backup plan. However, unexpectedly, the other party did not appear for the next 2 days. It was as though he had really left. At this moment, she realized that something was wrong. Logically, they should not have reached the mountain gate yet. The scenery of Lishan Mountain, the cloud pool, and the ocean of Qi should be visible from here. However, when she looked over, she did not see anything. She pondered in her heart and exclaimed, "Not good." The group of them should have fallen into some kind of illusion. The other party should have never left. Instead, he was always at the side and only changed his attack method. After all, the prohibition was a dead object. It could only be used to defend against a single attack. However, there were many methods that cultivators could use. For example, the maze barrier in front of her. She knew that Yuanming sect had a technique that allowed thousands of years to pass in the illusion formation. If she could not find a way to break out of it, she would be trapped here until she died. The other party did not even need to meet her face to face. He could easily deal with her. She gritted her teeth and took out a talisman from her pouch. She said, "Let's see if the sects will allow my treasure to fall into the hands of the devil sect. If not, then I can only use this item to break out." At this moment, the entire heaven and earth shook and shattered like glass. The world in front of her seemed to have shed a layer of filth and revealed its original color. She revealed a surprised expression and couldn't help but stand up. "May I know which fellow Taoist is helping me?" A female Taoist appeared in the sky and greeted, "Sect Master Xin, are you all right?" Xin Zixin said happily, "So it's Spiritual Master Pang." She curtsied and thanked him. "Thank you for saving me, Spiritual Master. If you don't mind, please come in and have a seat." Spiritual Master Pang said, "That's what I was thinking." Before entering the flower boat, she glanced at the sky casually. There were originally 2 flying rainbows there, but after Xin Zixin was rescued, they disappeared. After inviting Spiritual Master Pang to sit in the cabin, Xin Zixin hesitated and asked, "Spiritual Master, are you passing by or are you here to help us?" Spiritual Master Pang smiled and said, "I know what Sect Master Xin is worried about. Don't worry, I'm not here because someone asked me to. I'm only here because of the friendship between our 3 sections." Friendship between our 3 sects? Xin Zixin sighed and immediately stood up. She said seriously, "Spiritual Master, please accept another bow from me." Spiritual Master Pang sat down and accepted her bow before saying, "Spiritual Master Pang, I also know that your sect is in a difficult situation right now. It's not convenient for you to join any side, but the situation is the same as before. This is not a long-term solution. Look at how powerful the Yuan-Yang sect is, second only to the three sections. This time, they were almost forced into a corner by Bu Tian Pavilion. Shen Zixin knew that he had something else to say, so she bowed and said, "Spiritual Master, please give me some pointers." Spiritual Master Pang said, "I have a plan that satisfies both sides. You don't need to join any side. As long as Anetta Temple, Pingdu sect, and your Mountly establish an alliance and restore the reputation of the three sects in the West, your sect will be safe." Shen Zixin's eyes brightened. Back then, the three sects united to fight against the enemy because they were all weak. However, each sect's situation and way of doing things were different, so they did not establish an alliance. After Spiritual Master Yuling passed away, he naturally did not mention it again. If the three Western sects formed an alliance in name, they would not be considered to have joined the Black Tsong sect. In fact, they would be under the protection of the Black Tsong sect, and they would still be able to make their own decisions. This was indeed the most beneficial method for Mountly at present. After she ascended to the position of sect leader, to be honest, she also had such an idea. However, any interaction between sects required strength that matched one's strength. However, there was no Taoist Master Dong Tian in charge of the sect, so everything was just empty talk. Now that Taoist Master Pang took the initiative to propose it, and it might even be the instruction of the Dark Azure sect, why would she hesitate? She immediately said, "Zixin understands. Then please set a time, sect leaders. When the time comes, you only need to send a message, and Zixin will definitely come." To be continued. Chapter 1164. After Shen Zixin returned to the mountain with the talisman, she made an alliance with Pingdu and Huanjin on the White Jade platform in less than a month. From then on, the three schools in the West would protect each other. If any school encountered an enemy, the other two would come to their rescue. Soon, everyone knew about this. In the future, it would be hard for these two schools to avoid going against Mountly. However, these two schools were allies of Qinsong School. Although Mountly did not lean towards Qinsong School, it was under their protection. After Wu Fenggu returned and heard about this, he said to the disciple beside him, "Previously, I wanted to escort the people from Li Shan's sect back to the mountain gate, at least to let them know the goodwill of Jade Cloud sect. However, the sect had other plans, so I could only not move. Now that the three sects in the West have formed an alliance, even if Li Shan is not a pawn of Lin Song, those two sects will not let them near Jade Cloud sect." The disciple asked curiously, "After Zhenren Yuling ascended, only the spiritual cave in Mountly is worth people's attention. There is nothing left. Is Master too concerned about it?" Wu Fenggu said, "Although Yuling has ascended, Mountly is her life's work. She must have left behind some means to protect the school. Right now, Lan Song and I are trying to recruit allies from all over the place. The reason for this is to increase the number of chips in our hands as much as possible so that we have a better chance of victory in battle. At a time like this, we can't give up on anything that can be of help." The disciple said, "Then why didn't Master tell the school?" Wu Fenggu mocked himself, "If my words carry enough weight, I won't have to worry about these matters. Moreover, this can only be done and not said. Otherwise, I won't praise you if you're right and blame you if you're wrong." The disciple hesitated. He wanted to speak but stopped. Wu Fenggu did not need to think too much. He knew what he was thinking. He said, "Are you wondering why the Wu family did not establish another school and insisted on being in charge of the same school as the Zhou family?" The disciple kowtowed and said, "I dare not." Wu Fenggu said casually, "You don't have to hide it. I had the same thoughts as you when I was young. However, when you become the Zhenren, you won't think like this." In the early years, the Zhou clan and the Wu clan had joined forces. Only then were they able to defeat all the outsiders one by one. In this way, the Zhou clan continued to grow stronger, and the Wu clan similarly gained many benefits. Not to mention the fact that the two clans had established a contract for generations, there were also many marriages between them. You and me, I and you until now. They were already inseparable. Moreover, the Wu clan had never thought of suppressing the Zhou clan. They were willing to take a lower position. The Wu clan's Grotto Heaven's offerings had always been the same as the Zhou clan's Jinren. There was no difference between the two. Other than the younger generation who needed to take care of some mundane affairs, the older generation would still be respected by the Zhou clan. How could he be so satisfied? However, the people of the Grotto Heaven didn't take any action, and the disciples were dissatisfied. It was completely useless. The disciple only said, "This disciple will only listen to Master." Wu Fenggu grunted and said, "You don't need to understand the reason behind it. You only need to know that if Yu Xiao perishes, then my Wu clan will perish. If Yu Xiao perishes, then my Wu clan will perish." Blood Soul Sect, Ancient Spring Stage. Enlightened being one was playing chess with Gong Liangchu of the Netherworld Spring Sect's Paradise. After he put down a chess piece, he asked with a smile, "Fellow Taoist Gong Liangchu's clone was destroyed by Yu Shirong this time. Are you just going to endure it?" Gong Liangchu did not look annoyed at all. He put down a chess piece and said, "Senior brother Yuan from my sect often says that we should endure it first. We can plan for great things in the future. The internal strife of the celestial sect is not far away. Why should we care about the moment of anger? One day we can make them pay back." There had long been a consensus among the various sects of the Devil sect that the Qinsong and Yu Xiao would make a move sooner or later. There had been many battles in the celestial sect over the past tens of thousands of years. However, it was different this time. If the two sects were to fight, it would definitely be a great battle that would sweep through the celestial sect. After this battle, it was very likely that there would be two results. One was that both sects would suffer heavy losses, and the power of the celestial sect would definitely decline. The other was that one of the sects would be destroyed, and the other would suffer heavy losses. No matter which result it would give the spiritual sect a chance to rise. In the face of such a situation, most of the people in the Devil sect thought that they needed to stay calm and observe the situation. When the situation became better, they would then choose the right time to make a move. After all, the spiritual sect had been here for tens of thousands of years. They did not mind waiting a little longer. Moreover, the Jade Cliff could suppress the continent. No matter how they fought, at least the Donghua continent would not be destroyed. Jinren Wen smiled and said, "Waiting for the right time to make a move is a good idea. I am just afraid that the situation may not change as I wish." Gong Liangchu cupped his hands and said, "Jinren Wen's predictions have always been accurate. I would like to hear your wise opinion." Wen Qingxiang said, "It is not a wise opinion. These two sects have been planning for a long time. Although I do not know what their goal is, before they make a move, they will not allow the spiritual sect to watch from the side. Who knows, they might have a way to drag us into the swamp together." Gong Liangchu said, "Jinren's words are very clear. But even if the spiritual sect knows, what can we do? Do we have to make a move first?" To put it bluntly, the Devil sect had been suppressed for tens of thousands of years. Their foundation and potential were far inferior to the celestial sect. Even if they borrowed some of the power of heaven and earth during the demonic calamity, they were still at a disadvantage. There were some things that they could not do even if they wanted to. Jinren Wen said, "Actually, there is a risky way." Gong Liangchu was interested and said, "Jinren, why don't you tell me about it? Rest assured, once it enters my ears, no one else will hear it." Jinren Wen smiled and said, "There is nothing that cannot be said to others. I am not afraid that someone will hear it." He put down the chess piece and straightened his body. His eyes flashed as he said, "What I mean is, if the Qinsong and Yu Xiao clans fight, why don't the 6 sects of the spiritual sect join forces and destroy Shaoqing?" Destroy Shaoqing? Gong Liangchu was shocked. His movement stopped and the chess piece in his hand could no longer move. He said in shock, "Jinren Wen, let's not talk about the fact that the Shaoqing sect is not to be trifled with. Aren't you afraid that the celestial sect will turn around and attack you?" Jinren Wen smiled and said, "How can that be? If the Qinsong and Yu Xiao clans fight, Shaoqing will stay out of it. If I fight with him, wouldn't it be in line with the intentions of the two sects? If Shaoqing has an alliance with one of the sects, then when we attack him, the sect that is not his ally will definitely delay the other sect." Gong Liangchu crushed the chess piece and asked, What about the benefits? Even if I fight with Shaoqing, what is the benefit? When Qingxiang looked at him and said in a deep voice, if the spiritual sect wants to grow stronger, then we must find a way to suppress the celestial sect. Just like what the celestial sect has done to me for the past 10,000 years. If I attack Shaoqing while the Qinsong and Yuxiao clans are fighting, then I only have to face one sect. But if the two sects stop fighting, then I will have to face the remaining forces of Shaoqing and celestial sect. You can tell which is easier and which is more difficult. Gong Liangchu did not speak for a long time. After a while, he said, what if the Zhenren is wrong? Wen Qingxiang said, that's fine. With the protection of Mingyi from the Netherworld Spring sect, and the celestial sect needs me to suppress the Jianyin demon, will they destroy the spiritual sect? How bad will the situation be? Gong Liangchu thought carefully and shook his head. Shaoqing is not easy to fight. Even if we can destroy this sect, we will suffer heavy casualties. It's better to sit back and do nothing. Wen Qingxiang stared at him and said, to achieve great things, there is always a price to pay. As long as we plan carefully, we may be able to reduce the losses. But if we don't do it, we will only miss opportunities again and again, and then lament our bad luck. Gong Liangchu sat and thought for a long time before saying, Zhenren invited me to play chess today for this matter. No wonder you asked me about the slaying of my doppelganger. Zhenren's words make some sense. I will discuss it with the headmaster later. When Qingxiang smiled and said, what is fellow Taoist Gong Liangchu going to say? Gong Liangchu said without hesitation, of course I will tell you the truth. At this point, his expression changed. Zhenren, do you have any other advice? When Qingxiang leaned forward and said, my friend, you can tell Zhang School that although it is not necessary to fight with Shaoqing, it is always good to be prepared. In this way, if you really want to attack, you will not be in a hurry. My friend, you are not wrong. Gong Liangchu looked at him and thought for a while. He sighed, Zhenren, you have put in a lot of effort. Zhenren said, my friend, you are too serious. But I think, rather than being forced into the trap by the two sects, it is better to find a way to break out of it. After the destruction of the Honghe small world, the Donghua continent returned to its usual silence. In the blink of an eye, another 20 years had passed. In the Tianqing Hall, Zhang Yan stood in front of the stairs with his sleeves behind his back, looking at the intercept demon that was floating with the wind. As the demon grew bigger and bigger, the hall could no longer accommodate its leaping and turning. In order to not lose its ferocity, he would let it out every once in a while to stretch its body. Now that it was in the sky, the radius of a few miles outside the hall was almost completely covered by it. However, this was because the demon had not stretched out its full strength. Otherwise, it would not be a problem for it to cover half of the Tianqing continent. After flying in the air for a long time, the intercept demon seemed to feel tired. It let out an ear-piercing screech and landed on the ground. As its body was flat, it looked like there was a layer of thick, bright-colored fur in front of it. Zhang Yan felt a desire to get close to him. He shook his sleeves and the lake in front of the hall churned. Immediately, a large fish that was a mile long was pulled up by his mana. When the segmented demon saw the fish, he seemed to be excited. Without waiting for the fish to struggle back into the water, he opened his body and covered the fish's body. It was as though he was wrapping the fish tightly from head to tail. After all, it was refined from the remains of a heavenly demon. Even though it was so big, it still maintained its habit of devouring blood. However, it was not like 10,000 years ago. There were no more big demons for it to devour. Therefore, Zhang Yan sent a clone to the North Sea to catch many mutants and threw them into the lake in the hall. After eating such a big fish, it could ensure that it would not move for 100 days. In just a few dozen breaths, the intercept demon's body gradually shrunk. In the end, it stopped changing when it was about 1,000 feet long. Zhang Yan pondered for a while. Previously, he had used the Qinghong sword pill to test its body. This time, it was different from before. He needed to use force to break through that layer of fur. This kind of body was actually tough enough, but he was still not satisfied. He pondered, if this continues according to plan, This demon will need at least another 10 years to truly grow. However, the surging of the earth chi is becoming more and more intense. I don't know when the various sects will notice it. I can't wait any longer. Why don't I move it out of the Tianqing Hall and throw it into the North Sea? Let it devour living things and supplement it with medicinal stones so that I can use it as soon as possible. To be continued. Chapter 1165. A few days later, Zhang Yan created a clone and sent the segmented demon to the North Sea. He had refined the segmented demon using the living refinement technique, so they were connected. If he wanted to summon it back, he only needed to think about it, so he wasn't afraid that it would escape. Thus, after throwing it there, he threw in enough medicinal stones to last for 10 years and didn't pay any more attention to it. His true body and Dharma body sat in the Hall of Crossing Truth and used the abyssal heavy water to cultivate day and night. He didn't care about anything else. 3 years passed while he was in seclusion. The abyssal heavy water that surrounded him was slowly pushed away and floated up, turning into a spiral wave that flew into the sky. Under his control, the water split up and turned into countless water droplets that floated around his body. At first glance, this water was similar to the Xianming heavy water, but its weight was far greater. As a result, he expended quite a bit of effort to slightly refine the Xianming heavy water. Now, not only did the two of them look almost the same from the outside, even if a cultivator were to sense it, it would be difficult for them to detect any flaws in their haste. Those who knew about this method of his would inevitably suffer a great loss if they still followed the method he had prepared beforehand to break it. He raised his hand and pointed. The heavy water gathered at one spot and obediently returned to the soil platform. Then he stabilized his chi dynamic and examined his Dharmakaya. He noticed that his Dharmakaya had improved tremendously in this closed-door cultivation compared to when he was at the 6th barrier stage. Now that he had accumulated enough, if he didn't think of a way to break the thick wall above him, he wouldn't be able to continue moving forward no matter how much he cultivated. It was like how a pond could only have so much water, but when it rained, it would overflow. Only by expanding it and turning it into a vast lake could it contain more water. In reality, his foundation was deep enough. He could have tried to break the barrier thousands of years ago, and at the same time, he was more than half confident. However, he knew that he had a long road ahead of him, and he couldn't be greedy. The more he accumulated, the smoother his path would be. Thus, he suppressed his momentum and waited for his magic power to rise to the point where it couldn't advance any further. Just now was the time. Now, the time had come. He no longer hesitated. With a slight tug of his mind, boundless Xian Qi emerged from nothingness. Not long after, it enveloped the entire Xuanzi ocean realm. For a moment, thunder and lightning resounded throughout the realm. The formation spirit sensed the boundless energy and immediately knew what had happened. He hurriedly activated all the formations in the small world and ordered the 4 directions mages to guard every formation pillar. Because he had experienced the same thing the last time, this time he did it in an orderly manner. The surrounding sea was only slightly shaken before it calmed down again. At the same time, Ning Chongxian, who was cultivating in the side hall, also sensed something and looked up. After a while, he pondered for a while. Just now, he withdrew his gaze and went back to meditating. Many living beings in the lower realm thought that this change would be the same as the last time, and that it would pass very quickly. Who knew that the profound energy in the sky would not disperse for a long time, and it lingered for an entire 3 years. Finally, it disappeared, and thousands of miles of emptiness were revealed. Just now, those living beings dared to come out to forage for food. Fortunately, all the things in this realm were extraordinary. When they were not moving, they could nourish themselves with spiritual opportunity. Otherwise, they would have starved to death. On the platform in the main hall, strands of profound energy gathered and formed a Dharmakaya. When Zhang Yan sat down again, he had already broken through the 7th barrier. It was different from the 6th heavenly barrier. It was not difficult to break through this barrier. There was not even the slightest obstruction. Everything seemed to be going smoothly. However, he was very clear. There was actually great danger hidden in this. After breaking through the barrier, his mana increased all the way. Moving forward, he could not stop for a long time. Hence, this round took an exceptionally long time. At that time, his entire body seemed to be pushed by a river, and there was no way for him to stop. If his strength was slightly lacking, the consequences would be unpredictable. He could feel that there was still a long way to go before he touched the real end. It was just the 7th barrier, and it was already like this. If he wanted to break through the barrier in the future, it would take even longer, and it would be even more dangerous. Naturally, he could stop now and cultivate the embryo to step into the 3rd realm. Then there would be fewer twists and turns. However, ever since he stepped on the path of cultivation, he had to overcome all obstacles along the way. Even if there was no path ahead, he would find a way to open up a path. Why would he avoid danger? If he did not reach the real end, he would definitely not retreat. Now that he had cultivated to this stage, he had actually surpassed the limit of a normal cultivator. Normally speaking, as long as one had not cultivated the embryo, one would still be lacking compared to a 3rd realm cultivator. Just like a hidden dragon in a deep pond, even if its body was strong and it had all the scales and claws, it was still trapped in a corner. If it did not enter the sea, it would not be able to soar into the sky. However, he cultivated both chi and strength, and he had many techniques at his disposal. He was confident that when it came time to battle, even if he was up against someone of this generation, he would still be able to put up a good fight. After stabilizing his chi, he gazed at the deep abyss heavy water that filled the soil platform. With a thought, he easily guided it to the front of him, turning it into a stream that flowed in front of him. He thought to himself, this platform of bearing transformation and imperial earth is no longer sufficient for me. I can either borrow some from the upper extreme hall or the daylight hall and build an even more majestic one, or I can simply enter the grotto heaven to cultivate. Now that Huoxian had not returned, the daylight hall had no one to manage it. Thinking about it, he could only borrow some from the upper extreme hall. Flicking his sleeve, he placed the heavy water back. Then, he pointed with his finger and a talisman book materialized. He then sent it to the upper extreme hall. After a while, he heard footsteps. It was Jingyu entering from the outside. Arriving in front of him, he handed over a letter and said in a low voice, "Master, Spiritual Master Zhao sent a letter." Zhang Yan's expression changed slightly. With a sweep of his gaze, the letter floated over and unfolded in front of him. The so-called Spiritual Master Zhao was Zhang Boyan's disciple, Zhao Yang. Everything this person learned came from the Nether Spring sect. Therefore, for a long time, he had been cultivating in the demonic sect's territory and acting as the eyes and ears of the Dujin Hall. Zhao Yang knew that the Nether Spring sect did not trust cultivators like him who had returned from outside. He was also afraid of revealing any flaws, so he accepted the task and went to a lower sect to guard it. Because he did not fight with anyone, no one came to control him. He had been secretly using various methods to try and understand the various arrangements of the Nether Spring sect. The content of the letter was that the demonic sect had been acting strangely recently. Actually, because of the confrontation between the Qinsong and Yuxiao clans, the 6 demonic sects had never stopped preparing. However, in the past, their arrangements were as smooth as flowing water. This time, it felt slightly rushed. Although it was not obvious, it made him feel a little strange. Zhao Yang knew that it was impossible for anything to change without reason, and there was usually a reason that pushed things from behind. Thus, he didn't take this lightly, and he wrote down his suspicions and judgment before sending it to the Truth Purification Hall. As for how the sect judged it and what they would do, it wasn't something he could worry about. Zhang Yan put down the letter and looked around. He asked, "Are there any letters from other places?" Jingyu said, "Yes, I have sorted them all out." He took out a wooden box from his sleeve and placed it firmly on the table. Zhang Yan opened it and looked through it one by one. Then, he revealed a look of contemplation. Using this as an inference and combining it with Zhao Yang's letter, he found that in the past few years, the 6 demonic sects had made some moves. They frequently asked for offerings from the lower sections. Therefore, he guessed that the demonic sects were targeting one of the sections. However, no matter what they did, the original plan of the Qinsong school would not have any changes. This was because long before the plan was made, sect leader Qin had already considered all the powers. Therefore, whether they made a move or not, there would not be any hindrance. At this moment, he flicked his finger and a sword beam flew out of the small world. It landed in the direction of the great pool of Dragon Abyss and quickly entered the crevice of the Nine Returns pillar. After a brief investigation, he thought to himself, the qi of the earth is surging non-stop. It is more than 100 times stronger than before. Even with the restriction lock, there are signs of leakage. I'm afraid that there will be movement at the boundary-setting needle very soon. At that time, the sects will know that someone is excavating the earth's roots. It seems that there is not much time left. He sensed again, but it was to observe the changes of the segmented demon. In the past few years, the demon had been foraging for food and cultivating in the North Sea. It was very happy. However, its body had also become bigger, occupying a radius of 100 miles. At this moment, it was floating across the sea, chasing after a strange whiteback fish with 10,000 tentacles on its belly. As if it felt Zhang Yan's attention, it trembled and gave up on the food that was about to reach its mouth. It shrunk on the spot and did not move. Zhang Yan pondered and said, "This demon is like a fish in water here. Looking at the situation, its potential has not been exhausted. That's good, I'll let it stay here for now. When the tribulation begins, I'll call it back." Currently, he had prepared many methods for the human tribulation, but the heaven and earth leaf was the only one that he had not completed. Although he lacked this item, he was confident that he could still fight against Zhu Zhen with his rank 5 strength path body and the treasured clothing worn by the past hall masters of Duzhen. However, this was still one less defensive method than what he had planned. Fortunately, a long time ago, he had imagined that he might not be able to refine this treasure. If that was really the case, he only needed to make a small change in his tactics. Just as he was thinking about it, he felt a sensation in his heart. When he checked, it was the consciousness transmitted by the heaven and earth leaf. That feeling was like a fetus in an egg that was eagerly waiting to come out, but it was still unable to struggle before it broke out of the shell. He immediately knew that this was the true consciousness of the treasure sensing its master's intention. Zhang Yan smiled, and then he withdrew the world leaf from his sleeve and said, "Then give it another try. If you're unable to make it to the tribulation, then it's the will of the heavens, and it can't be forced. However, if it's like that, then I won't use you again in the future." These words were not just words, but he was really prepared to do so. A word was a vow. If he couldn't refine a true treasure before the tribulation, then he would abandon it. The heaven and earth leaf was connected to his mind, so it immediately understood that if it missed this opportunity, it would never be able to transform again. The consciousness suddenly surged, and it was full of vigor. The treasured body of the leaf trembled slightly, and there were even halos emitting from it. Zhang Yan nodded and said, "Yes, that's right. I hope you can come out soon. At that time, you and I, master and servant, will work together to deal with the great tribulation." As he spoke, he pressed his hand and sent a stream of clear air into it. Chapter 1166. Under the eye of the West Sea, a ball of fierce flames spiraled in the middle, with traces of golden light flashing rapidly, dazzling brilliance, and incomparably blazing. In this kind of blazing fire, a figure could be seen sitting cross-legged. Just by breathing, it brought along a hot scarlet wind within a radius of 1,000 miles. The sky was filled with sparks drifting in all directions, dazzling brilliance. After a long while, a loud sound was heard. The sparks scattered, and the golden qi shot in all directions. The eye of the sea was reflected in a dazzling light, and the mana that spread in all directions caused tiny ripples to form on the floating capital mystical water above. Huixian opened his eyes. With the help of this earth fire and gale, he finally broke through the barrier after decades of cultivation and entered the second level of the elephant phase realm. When he made up his mind to sit and observe in the eye of the sea, He once told Zhang Yan that he had the protection of the pure heart pendant and a lot of pill jades, so he could cultivate here in peace. However, after several decades, he finally understood that the dangers of this place were far beyond what he had expected. Just the poisonous flames that changed indeterminately every day had almost injured his vitality several times, and there was even a time where he had narrowly escaped death. Not to mention this, he didn't know if it was because of the Xianhui sect's river mountain seal suppressing it for 10,000 years, or simply because of the sun-swallowing green locust's backup plan. There was an extremely strange insect below that was not recorded in the ancient books. Its body was like gravel, and from birth to death, it only took a few breaths of time. It was especially thirsty for things that burned spiritual vigor, so it constantly came to disturb. Because it was born from the earth fire, it was almost impossible to kill them all, and he was also extremely annoyed. If it wasn't for the fact that this insect could only come up when the fire wind below spewed out, and that there were only a few 100,000 of them each time, he could still barely deal with it. Perhaps he would have been forced out of this place by these strange insects long ago. Later, he thought of a countermeasure. Every once in a while, he would take the initiative to go deep into the eye of fire to clear it, and then he could cultivate in peace. But it was also because of this, and with enough pill jades, that his cultivation was much faster than if he cultivated step by step. The way out is sealed by the floating capital mystical water above, and I have to successfully return to the surface now. He needed to open up a grotto heaven here and escape. Otherwise, he could only wait for the sex people to come and help him before the tribulation began. It's just that with the disturbance of that insect, it's impossible to do this in peace. Unless we go deeper, it's better to make it stay away for a few months. After careful consideration, he realized that he had been away from the sect for a long time. He had no idea what the situation outside was like. To deal with the great calamity, not only did he have to rely on his cultivation, he also had to make preparations in many aspects. If he was trapped here, he would not be able to do anything. Thinking to this point, he adjusted his breathing and stood up. With a flash of light, he leaped toward the mouth of the fire below. In the Changguan Grotto heaven, Sun Jinren sat on the cloud couch with a pot hanging in his hand. As he gently stroked it, the pot swayed back and forth. Every time it swayed, the sound of the lake and sea churning would be emitted from within the pot. From time to time, tiny lightning sparks would jump out from the mouth of the pot. At this time, a beautiful maid came over. She lightly bowed and said, Taoist Ning has arrived." Sun Jinren rolled up his sleeves. He kept the pot and said, "Summon him here." After a while, Ning Chongxian arrived at the bottom of the stairs and bowed, "Long live master." Sun Jinren asked, "How's the sacrificial refining of the treasure I borrowed from you?" Ning Chongxian replied, "I can already use it." Sun Jinren said, "It's good that you can order it around. After all, it's not your own sacrificial refining, there are some unsatisfactory parts." Ning Chongxian said, "I know that it's not easy for master to borrow this treasure. How would I dare to be greedy?" Qinsong School was facing a great war, and all the Zenrins were preparing for it. Master and disciple, except for those who had obtained the fortune of their ancestors, or those who had already sacrificial refined the treasure, they could only borrow it from the sect. As for the aristocratic families, because of the generations of inheritance, most of them had precious treasures with them. However, to increase their own combat power, they would not mind borrowing one more. Now that the treasures in the Hall of Grandmasters were almost all distributed by the Zenrins, he was already lucky to get one. Sun Jinren smiled. "Jinren Du was the one who wanted this treasure, but I know that he has some wealth, so it's not a big deal to lose one treasure. So I discussed with him and gave it to you." Ning Chongxian bowed. "Master's kindness, I can't repay even 1/10,000th of it." Sun Jinren nodded. "I'm going to the main hall, follow me." He waved his sleeves to open the array door, and the two of them stepped into it. After a while, they stepped on the floating heavenly palace and walked in front. After a while, the master and disciple arrived at a remote hall. When they entered, they saw a long prismatic stone, about 10 feet high, and about 2 people's circumference. It looked like a crystal jade, half of it was transparent, while the other half was misty. Sun Jinren pointed at it and said, "This is called Ag Stone. It's born to store spiritual vigor and not overflow. Look at the Qi cloud, it's the accumulation of the Qi of the earth." He paused for a while and said, "If everything goes well after a few years, the Qi of the earth will be enough for my family. However, to cross the other families, it's not enough yet, and I'm afraid that we won't be able to wait until then. The other sects will notice the change in the earth's root." As for why Qinsong School did not leave alone now that it had gathered enough Qi of the earth, it was because once the door between the two worlds was opened, if they wanted to cross, they could not allow external forces to destroy it. Moreover, the more people they wanted to protect, the longer it would take. They had to eliminate all the opposing forces in order to cross safely. If they wanted to follow He Jingqian's plan back then, to get rid of the whole school and only a few people to cross the world, it was not necessary. Qinsong School's spiritual vigor was enough. Because of the far-reaching impact of what happened back then, there were always people in the school who had doubts. That was why the stone was placed here for everyone to examine. At this time, no one in the school asked the question, since the accumulation of the Qi of the earth is not enough before the trial, why not collect it after the trial? Because everyone understood in their hearts that this was a backup plan prepared by sect leader Qin. Although the people of Qinsong School did not think that they would lose, sect leader Qin, as the helmsman of a school, had to consider everything in advance. If things went wrong, with the Qi of the earth in hand, Qinsong School and the League of Friendship could at least leave some orthodoxy seeds and retreat to outer space, and not all of them would be lost. Ning Chongxian thought for a while and bowed to Sun Jinren. He said, "Teacher, I have a question." Sun Jinren said, "Go ahead." Ning Chongxian said, "I have gone to the crack of the earth to collect the Qi before, and I know some clues about the Qi of the earth. I know that at this time, the Qi is already gushing out, and it can't be hidden for more than a few years. If it accumulates a little more, at most 1 or 2 more people will escape, and it won't affect the overall situation. So why wait? Why not take the initiative to attack now, and attack the outside world unexpectedly? If Yu Xiao can't react in time, as long as they can't help in the first moment, we can take down the few schools." Sun Jinren said, "You said that we can attack Nanhua, Taihao, Budian, and even the demon court at the same time with the momentum of a thunderbolt. Before Yu Xiao can recover, we can take them down. By then, Yu Xiao School won't be able to do anything alone, and they won't be able to make any waves. Then, maybe I don't have to use too much strength to fight with him, and I can force him to go to the other world?" Ning Chongxian said, "If I have any inappropriate thoughts, please enlighten me." Sun Jinren nodded and said, "What you said is actually not unreasonable. Even though it is not easy to attack the mountain gate, we need to be well prepared. With the strength of my Qinsong School and Shaoqing, and with the help of Pingdu and Huanjin, these few schools may not be able to stop us if we suddenly attack. But if we do so, why don't I take them by surprise, and combine everyone's strength to break the land of Donghua continent? Wouldn't this solve the problem once and for all, and it would be much easier than attacking the mountain gate?" Ning Chongxian became silent. It was not that he had never thought of this, but he had never seen the people of the world as ants. If he did this, millions of people in the world would die, and he would not accept it. Sun Jinren said plainly, "I will not do this, not because I pity the mortals, but because it is useless. I have also asked your grandmaster, and just now I understand the reason behind it." Ning Chongxian was a little surprised, and he bowed and said, "Please enlighten me." Sun Jinren thought for a while and said, "If it is a normal battle between sects, the changes will be the same, and it will not be out of common sense. But if the opponent has Xianshu, then it will be different. When the time comes, we only need to use it, and it will be enough to control the overall situation." Ning Chongxian was a little confused, and he asked, "What is Xianshu?" Sun Jinren said, "Xianshu is made by borrowing the treasures of the sects, strange qi, or the prohibition of the sections. Because this is the method of the ascended Jinren, it is not an exaggeration to say that its power can penetrate the heaven and earth. I do not really understand the mystery behind it, but I heard from the sect leader Jinren that the star stone on the peak of Donghua was once planted with a Xianshu. The person who controlled it was the sect leader of Butian Pavilion, and the purpose was to look after this continent. Ning Chongxian frowned and said, "Now Butian Pavilion is in the Yuxiao school's formation." "That's exactly where the problem lies," said Enlightened Sunday. "The art of protection can also be used to injure others. Before the battle begins, if we don't think of a way to break or exhaust this art, then we absolutely cannot attack in all directions. Otherwise, we will only attract unexpected disasters." Ning Chongxian thought for a while and said, "Butian Pavilion has such a mysterious technique, I think Yuxiao must have hidden it." Sun Jinren nodded and said, "Of course. Yuxiao School has Xianshu, Shaoqing Sect has Xianshu, and my Qinsong School also has it." At the same time, in the main hall of the floating heavenly palace, sect leader Qin and the others retreated and walked alone to the 100-feet-high screen wall in the hall. He looked up and saw a giant shadow that looked like a fish and a bird swimming around on the screen wall. It was a giant Kuan, and it was originally Tai Mingjinren's mount. This ancestor rode on this fish to break through the world, but for some reason when he returned to outer space, he did not take it with him, but left it behind. Because the body of the fish was too big, it needed to absorb and spit out a large amount of spiritual vigor, so Tai Mingjinren sealed it in the screen wall before he left. In the past, everyone could only see its spirit swimming in it. To it, this screen wall was just like a vast and boundless sea. Sect leader Qin took a few steps forward, swept his horsetail whisk, and removed the restriction on the screen wall. He said in a low voice, "Ingue, it is time for you to wake up." Chapter 1167. Zhang Yan understood the reason why the Heaven and Earth leaf was unable to shed its mystic form and enter the true form for so long. This treasure received the help of the dragon spine in the second refining, hence the depth of the treasure's foundation was rare in the world. That was why it was able to push the true consciousness to such a critical juncture. However, it was also because this item was extraordinary that the original true consciousness was slightly weak, hence it was especially difficult to pass the stage. However, by doing so, the chance of nurturing the true treasure was much faster than nurturing it himself. Moreover, with the tribulation ahead, he didn't have the time to slowly grind it there. Now that he made an oath, not only was he forcing himself, but he was also forcing the true consciousness. Very quickly, he knew that this step was the right one. Under the combined efforts of both inside and outside, in just a month, there was an inaudible sound coming from the Heaven and Earth leaf. The leaf surface relaxed, the veins of the leaf became unprecedentedly clear. Every stalk had a halo flowing on it, showing that it was full of vitality. At this moment, it had reached the crucial moment. The breath that rushed up in one go definitely couldn't be released. The true consciousness moved forward bravely. That was because it was provoked by his words previously. If it relaxed even a little, it would lose its obsession to move forward. If it wanted to do it again, at least it was impossible before the tribulation. If it wanted to succeed, this was the only chance. After refining for another 3 days, not only was the light on the leaf no longer bright, it gradually dimmed. Zhang Yan's expression didn't change at all. He just looked at it without blinking. After a long time, he heard a deep dragon roar reverberating in his ears, as if it came from far away. If one were to say that this leaf was originally dead, then it suddenly came back to life. A gust of wind blew out of nowhere, sweeping the Heaven and Earth leaf up. Zhang Yan allowed it to float out of his palm and lightly land in the ocean below. After it circled a few times on the surface of the water, it was discovered by a golden carp that was swimming around. Seeing an exquisite and beautiful leaf floating above, it was also very curious. Maybe it was attracted by the spiritual energy on the leaf. It wagged its tail and chased it underwater. After following it for a while, it noticed that there was no danger. In the end, he couldn't take it anymore, leaping up and swallowing the leaf. However, right at this moment, the strong winds that surged in the sky suddenly vanished without a trace, and the surroundings suddenly became completely silent. Even the tide below froze in that instant. The golden carp seemed to be held by an invisible force as well, and the world leaf merely swayed gently before gliding away. It was just a short moment. Everything returned to its original state. The tide continued to surge, and the wind was still blowing. The golden carp fell into the water with a splash. With a light leap, the leaf actually returned in front of Zhang Yan. Then, it spun down and transformed into a good-natured young man. Although he had delicate features, he was still a young man. However, there was a hint of maturity between his brows as he bowed respectfully. He said, "Greetings, old master. This lowly one has been born today. Please bestow me a name." Zhang Yan smiled and said, "Your name has already been decided." As he said that, he pointed a finger at the space between his eyebrows. The young man's body trembled slightly, and he immediately prostrated on the ground. "Zhang Zhe greets master. I hope that I will not disappoint master's expectations in the future." Zhang Yan nodded, "Very well." Zhang Zhe's body turned, and he turned into light and went into his sleeve. Zhang Yan gazed into the distance. Once the heaven and earth leaf was formed, all his plans would be complete. As for the remaining matters, what was left was to wait for the human disaster. He calmed his mind and started to channel his spiritual vigor wholeheartedly. This closed-door training lasted for 3 months. As he was immersed in the spirit will and qi movement, he heard a bell ringing. He got up and went to the side hall. There was a piece of psychic jade wall there. He stood in front of the jade wall and waved his sleeve. After a while, Qi Yuntian's figure appeared on the jade wall. He bowed and said, "Junior Zhang, greetings." Zhang Yan returned the greeting and said solemnly, "Senior brother Qi, are you looking for me because there's something in the sect that requires my help?" Qi Yuntian nodded, "I have something to discuss with junior brother. Today, sect master Jinren summoned Jinren Xiao, Jinren Du, Han Jinren, and Jinren Yen to ask about the details of the plan before the disaster. However, many things are inconvenient because Hall Master Dienkong is not around. I feel that the qi of the earth has been leaking more and more recently. I can already feel it when I get closer to the crack. It's not long before the disaster begins. Junior brother Hua has not returned yet. Should we call him back now?" Zhang Yan thought for a while and said, "Senior brother Hua has always been steady and decisive. He should know that the sect is approaching the disaster stage. If he has not returned now, he should be at a critical juncture in his cultivation. Why don't we wait for a while more?" Qi Yuntian thought for a while and nodded, "All right, let's wait for another 3 years." As for what would happen in 3 years, it was needless to say. By then, the qi of the earth would change, and the Donghua sects would realize that something was wrong. Qinsong School could not do without any combat power. By then, Huoxian would have to return to Qinsong School even if he did not want to. 2 years passed in the blink of an eye. On this day, there was a sudden surge of spiritual vigor above the floating heavenly palace. Many Zenrins in the sect were very familiar with this movement. Someone had escaped from the grotto heaven, and they knew who it was without asking. Huoxian stepped onto the steps of the hall, and the elders cultivating outside all came forward to welcome him. They said in unison, "Welcome back, Hall Master." At this moment, there was a flash of spiritual light, and a few disciples cultivating in the hall also came forward. They bowed in surprise and said, "Greetings, Master." Huoxian looked at everyone and said, "Get up." He then said to the disciples, "Follow me in." After sitting down in the hall, he felt that the spiritual vigor in the sect was abnormally flourishing. He carefully sensed it and realized that it came from a crack in the ground. He immediately understood that this was because after the door broke through the earth barrier and dug up the earth's roots, the qi of the earth surged up. He knew that the time was pressing, and there was not much time left for him to prepare. After thinking about it, he asked the few disciples below, "When I was not here, did anything happen in the hall?" A disciple stood up and said, "Master, everything is fine in the hall. However, a few Zenrins saw that you did not return for a long time and wanted to invite you back to take charge of the situation as soon as possible. That was why they went to the sect leader, but they were persuaded by Jinren Qi and Jinren Zhang." Huoxian nodded and said, "I understand, you guys can leave first." After dismissing the disciples, he adjusted his breathing and went to the upper hall to greet the sect leader. After he came out, he did not return to the house immediately, but went to the Duzhen hall. Zhang Yan saw him and invited him to take a seat. He smiled and said, "Senior Hu, just now, you must have a lot of work to do. Why do you have time to ask me about this?" Huoxian said, "After I came back, I asked a few disciples, and found out that a few Zenrins wanted to invite me back a year ago. It was junior brother and senior brother Qi who persuaded them. I won't hide it from junior brother, I was in the middle of opening the grotto heaven and couldn't get away. If I came back at that time, although I wouldn't have failed, I don't know how long I would have to explore, so I came to thank you." Zhang Yan smiled and said, "This is a small matter, senior brother Hu didn't have to specially come back." Huoxian said sincerely, "Let's not talk about this. Back then, I also relied on junior brother's help to cultivate safely under the fire of the CI." As he said, he took out a bottle of pill jades from his sleeves and placed it on the table. "I know that junior apprentice brother doesn't lack pill jades here, but your eldest disciple's talent is extraordinary. It shouldn't be difficult for him to pass that trial. Consider this an early congratulatory gift for me." Zhang Yan nodded and did not refuse. He accepted it generously. At this time, Huoxian took out a strange red grass that was half a foot long. Looking at its appearance, it looked like a coral. He said, "I inadvertently obtained this from the fire eye. Even though it grows in the blazing lava flow, it can still survive. I heard that Academy head Zhou is searching for this type of strange grass and strange wood. Junior brother, there's no harm in taking it." Zhang Yan smiled and said, "Then I thank senior brother Hua on behalf of teacher Zhou." Huoxian stood up and said, "The opening of the tribulation is near. I won't disturb junior brother's cultivation anymore. I'll take my leave now." Zhang Yan also stood up and cupped his hands. "I won't keep senior brother any longer. Take care, senior brother." After sending Huoxian off, he returned to his seat and quickly entered a meditative state again. Spring and autumn passed, the sun and moon alternated, and another 2 years passed. In Butian Pavilion, Tan Dingxian, the sect master, always felt uneasy when he was sitting and observing. He originally thought that his cultivation was hindered, but after a few careful investigations, he did not find anything wrong. This time, when he was finally able to clear his mind and enter a meditative state, he heard a huge rumble in the back of the hall. He could not help but be shocked and asked angrily, "What happened?" A disciple hurriedly entered the hall with a panicked expression and said, "Ancestor, it's not good." The yin-yang longevity pillar that was placed behind the hall collapsed. What? Tan Dingxian was startled and scanned it. Indeed, it was so, and his expression immediately turned ugly. This pillar of Qi was said to be able to identify the fate of a sect. Although he looked disdainful, he still had some respect for it. Now that it collapsed, there was no reason for this to happen, so he said, Quickly check it. Take my instrument to check the spiritual opportunity in the world." Although he did not know what was going on, Butian Pavilion was known as Butian and guarded the spiritual opportunity of the 9 continents. His first thought was to check the spiritual opportunity. The disciple took the instrument and after checking it, he replied, "Ancestor, the spiritual opportunity in the world is fine." Tan Dingxian said, "No, something big must have happened. Check again." Although he sounded so sure, he hoped that there were no changes in his heart. After a long time, the disciple said in a low voice, "The boundary needle seems to be moving." Although Tan Dingxian was looking everywhere for an oversight, when he heard this, he still did not believe it. "How is this possible? Are you sure you saw it wrong?" The disciple was also not sure. He only said this because he had no other choice, so he immediately stammered. Seeing him like this, Tan Dingxian waved his hand and said, "Forget it, I'll check it myself." He took the instrument and prepared to check the 9 continent boundary needles one by one. The first thing he paid attention to was the one on the East Hua continent. After a while, his whole body trembled and he said with a trembling voice, the boundary needle has been tampered with." At this moment, he was also stunned. The boundary needle was said to be used as a warning, but ever since it was erected, it had always been more of a deterrent than a practical one. He never thought that one day there would really be a sect that would extract the earth chi. After a while, he finally reacted and said in a hoarse voice, "Quick, quick, send a message to Yuxiao School. Oh no. I want to sound the alarm bell and let the whole world know about this." As he said this, his body turned into a beam of light and went straight to the highest point of the mountain. In just a short while, the bell above Butian Pavilion rang. Following this sound, the entire East Hua continent resonated with the loud sound. It was as if even the heavens and the earth had sensed this change. Countless thunderclouds gathered, strong winds rose, and lightning flashed. Many realms were hit by a storm of thunder and lightning. In the main hall of the floating heavenly palace, sect leader Qin opened his eyes and looked at the sky. He knew that he could not hide it anymore. He waved his big sleeves and stood up from his seat. He pushed open a matrix door, walked 100 steps, and arrived at the ancestral hall. The memorial tablets of the 5 generations of Qinsong School's leaders were enshrined here. Starting from the 2nd generation's leader, the remains of all the Jinren who had ascended were here. At the very top was the true tablet of the sect's founder, Tai Ming Jinren. He went forward and bowed to offer incense. After paying his respects, he took a few steps back and said, "To the generations of Qinsong School's founders, Disciple Qin Mabai respectfully says, ever since Disciple inherited the position of the sect leader, for the sake of building up the mountain, I have spent every day meditating and sleeping, not daring to slack off for even a moment. However, ever since the founder opened up the mountain, the spiritual opportunity of this realm has gradually become scarce, to the point where the heavens and the people are not in harmony. If I do not work hard, after thousands of years, there will be no more Qinsong School. I am incompetent. Today, I am willing to inherit the wisdom of the 3 generations of sect leaders, the Zhenren of the 2 halls, the Zhenren of the sect, and the external allies to eradicate the injustice, rise above the void, and create a new world. This is not for personal gain, but for internal self-sufficiency. Only for the continuation of the orthodoxy. Only for the continued prosperity of the mountain. May all the generations of sect leaders be blessed by the heavens." After saying this, he bowed a few more times, turned around, and walked out of the ancestral hall with a calm expression. He said calmly, "Come, sound the golden bell and gather the Zhenren of Qinsong." Chapter 1168. In the Duzhen Hall, Zhang Yan's expression did not change when he heard the commotion outside, but his eyes were deep. He had been waiting for this bell for a long time. He immediately said to Jing Yu, "Pass down my orders. The great battle is about to begin. The disciples of Clear Nether Heavenly Lake can enter my Black Lake Sea to hide. The various islands and manors can also enter if they are willing. The great battle is about to begin, and it is hard to say who will live or die. We are all disciples of my Dark Azure sect, so there is no need to differentiate between master and disciple." Jing Yu nodded and did not dare to hesitate for a moment. He immediately left with the order. Zhang Yan knew that not only the 3 small worlds in the Sky Palace, but all the small worlds and caves in Qinsong School were doing the same thing. All the junior disciples of Qinsong School would hide in them. In reality, hiding in a small world might not be safe during a war between sections. There were many ways to break small worlds in the world. Especially Butian Pavilion, which had many secret treasures passed down by ancient cultivators, were used to correct the spiritual energy of the world. It was not easy to use them before, but once they were on the opposite side, they would definitely use them without any hesitation. Once a world collapsed, normal cultivators would die immediately. Even their souls might not be left behind. Although the floating heavenly palace's 3 realms were under the protection of the heavenly palace's restrictions, once a battle broke out, this place would definitely be heavily guarded. Therefore, no one could say for sure whether they could avoid it. After the bell rang 6 times, he stood up and walked out of the hall. Ning Chongxian was already waiting outside. He bowed and said, "Hall Master." Zhang Yan bowed back and said, "Hall Master Ningzhua, please follow me." He walked first and pushed with his hand. The two of them crossed the formation door and arrived at the main hall of the floating heavenly palace. At this moment, most of the Zhen people were already there. Seeing him enter the hall, they all stood up and said, "Greetings, Hall Master Ji Zhen." Zhang Yan bowed back. He came to the main seat on the left and bowed to Hu Xian. Both of them sat down. Ning Chong Xian also sat on the side. He looked around and saw that all the Zhen people were seated. After the bell rang 9 times, all the Zhen people's faces turned serious and they all stood up. After a while, sect leader Qin came out from the back of the hall. Behind him were Qi Yuntian and Lu Junyang. All the Zhenren saluted and said, "Sect leader Zhenren." After sect leader Qin sat down, Zhu Zhen also sat down. The place where Qi Yuntian landed was close to the sect leader, slightly higher than the two hall masters. Only LV Junyang stood behind sect leader Qin. As a protector, he only needed to listen to the orders of the sect leader alone. He didn't even need to pay attention to the orders of the other two hall masters. Although his position was transcendent, he didn't have the right to make decisions. Zhang Yan looked over. With him in the lead, the seats were arranged in order. There were Meng Jide, Shen Baishuang, Qin Yu, Mu Shoushan, Zhu Zhixing, and Sun Jiyan. The other side was led by Hu Xian. They were Xiao Rongyu, Du Yunzhan, Han Ziyang, Yan Gongzhen, and Peng Wenin. Including Qi Yuntian and Lu Junyang, there were a total of 16 Grotto Heaven Zenrens in the main hall of Qinsong School. Since the creation of this world, there hadn't been a sect that could gather so many Grotto Heaven Zenrens. Even in the ancient times, there hadn't been such a sect in the 3 Western continents. At this moment, a stream of light rose above the 2 Dharma thrones in front of the hall. Then, 2 figures appeared. They were the incarnations of Pingdu sect's Qi Hongchan and Anjin Temple's Pu Xianxing. After the 2 greeted sect leader Qin, they sat down in the hall. Meng Zhen stood up and said, "Sect leader Zhenren, Lishan sect's sect leader Shen wishes to see you." Sect leader Qin said, "Please." After a while, there were a few sounds of bells outside. Shen Zixin's figure appeared at the entrance of the hall. She first bowed and stepped in. Then she walked up the stairs. The Grotto Heaven Zhenren on both sides looked over. She was just a Yuanian cultivator. Along the way, she almost couldn't move under such pressure. She was the leader of a sect. She had also served Zhenren Yuling for a long time, so she didn't lose her composure. Her expression was considered calm. When she reached the jade platform, she curtsied and said, "Lishan sect's Shen Zixin greets Qinsong School's sect leader Qin and sect leaders." Sect leader Qin said, "Sect leader Shen, you don't have to be so polite." Qi Hongchan and Pu Xianxing nodded at her. Meng Zhen said, "Sect leader Shen, why are you here today?" Shen Zixin bowed and said, "Before Lishan sect's former sect leader Zhenren Yuling ascended, he left behind a talisman. He said that there was a mystery inside. He said that if there were any major changes in this world, he should give this talisman to your sect. Today, Zixin will follow his orders and present this talisman." As she spoke, she took out a talisman book and held it up high, placing it on top of the platform. Zhang Yan took a look at the talisman. If he was not mistaken, this talisman contained a mysterious technique. He was very clear that with Zhenren Yuling's temperament, this talisman might not necessarily be given to Qinsong School, but it could also be given to Yuxiao School. It all depended on how the situation would change and how it would benefit him. However, under the persuasion of Ping Du and Huanjin, Shen Zixin came to Qinsong School before the new year. She had also signed the talisman, which was why the talisman ended up in his hands. Sect leader Qin waved his horsetail whisk and took the talisman in his hand. He looked at it and nodded, "Taoist Yuling, thank you." He looked over and asked gently, "Sect leader Shen, do you have any request?" Shen Zixin bowed deeply and said, "Lishan sect has a shallow foundation and is not strong enough. Today, I would like to ask for your protection to go beyond the heavens. I hope sect leader Qin will allow it." Sect leader Qin nodded and said, "Since your sect is willing to join Qinsong School, I will naturally accommodate you." Shen Zixin bowed again and boarded the ship of Qinsong School. She did not know if it was the right decision, but she remembered what Zhenren Yuling had said. She also thought that there were many sects in Qinsong school that she could talk about and take care of. On the other hand, Yu Xiao did not have much contact with Nanhua, Tai Hao and the other sections. Their attitude was also cold, so even if she joined them, she would only be suspicious. After she presented the talisman, because she was also a sect leader and the first disciple of an ascended Jinren, she had a seat. However, she knew that her cultivation experience was too low to be on the same level as Jinren. Hence, after she sat down, she lowered her head and did not say a word. Meng Zhen spoke again, reporting to sect leader, "Should we inform the other sects about Qinsong school's intention to go beyond the heavens?" Sect leader Qin replied, "There's no need to do that. The sects will definitely send a punitive force to denounce us. When that time comes, it's settled. Those who are willing to follow me can go. Those who are unwilling can do as they please. If they come to stop us, we'll just behead them." When everyone heard this, they all responded in unison. Suddenly, a talisman flew in from outside the hall and headed straight for Zhang Yan. He reached out and took it, glanced at it, then bowed to the person above and said, "Sect leader Jinren. Clear Feather Sect leader Tao Jinhong, Chongyuezhen Monastery elder Mi Xiaonan, and Long Heavy Monastery sect leader Li Xiaomi have sent a letter. The formation plate above the South Sea has already been set. Once the sect gives the order, it can be activated immediately." Sect leader Qin said in a deep voice, "This battle is not about winning or losing in a short period of time. The earth energy is still in the process of being absorbed. If the enemy doesn't move, I won't move first." Zhang Yan nodded and said, "Disciple understands. I'll send a letter to inform them immediately." In Butian Pavilion, Tan Dingxian sat alone in the attic. He looked at the turbulent winds and clouds in the sky with a heavy expression. Bu Jingsu came to his back and said, "Sect leader's senior brother. Based on the flow of the earth veins and the changes in the spiritual opportunity, the earth energy should be coming from the north." Even though Tan Dingxian had expected this, his body could not help but tremble. He mumbled, "How could it be like this? How could it be like this?" But after a while, he shook his head and sighed. "Why is it so unwise, so unwise?" After sighing, he said in a painful tone, "The great calamity is coming, the great calamity is coming." Bu Jingsu carefully asked, "May I ask how senior brother should deal with this?" Tan Dingxian scoffed and said, "What is there to deal with? If Qinsong school dares to do this, they must be prepared to fight against all the sects in the world. Send a letter to all the sections. Inform them about this." Bu Jingsu bowed and said, "Junior brother, please do as you say." However, Tan Dingxian stopped him and said, "Wait, I will bring my Butian Pavilion's magical treasures and go to Jade Firmament first. I can only hope that Master Lingya has the means to stop this person and save the sky. Try to control the mountain gate and try to get closer to Mochiu Cliff." Not much time had passed. Rays of golden light flew out of Butian Pavilion's mountain gate and went to every sect's mountain gate. Even the 6 demonic sects were not left behind. In Yuanyang sect, the sect leader Chu Rui quickly received the letter. However, after reading it, his usual calm expression disappeared and was replaced by a deep frown. He had expected that Yutsong's sect had always been making arrangements in the dark and that they would start a war with Jade Heaven sect sooner or later. However, he had never thought that Yutsong's sect would actually dig up the earth's roots and harvest earth chi. What was Qinsong school trying to do by acting without considering the consequences? He ordered people to summon Wen, Fu, Wu, Wu, and Xiao, the 5 heavenly abode spiritual masters. Then he passed the letter to everyone to read. After the 5 of them read it, they all showed the most shocked expression, as if they couldn't believe it. Enlightened Master Wen hesitated for a moment before stepping forward and saying, "What the Dark Azure sect is doing is a great crime against the world. They will definitely be attacked by all sections. Sect leader's senior martial brother, we can't hesitate anymore. Now that the calamity has clearly arrived, we can only seek stability by relying on the Jade Cloud sect. If I waver here and there, who knows if the sects will also think that I am standing on the Dark Azure sect's side and eradicate me together." Chu Rui nodded and asked, "Are you sure that Yu Xiao will win?" Reverend Wen said, Forgive me for speaking nonsense, but once the earth's roots are moved, even Shaoqing and the 6 demonic sects will not tolerate their Yutsong sect. Even if they have 14 reverends in their sect, how can they withstand the combined attack of all the sects in the world? Chu Rui shook his head and said, let's not talk about the demonic sections. Shaoqing might not stand on Yu Xiao's side. They might even ally with Qinsong school. Why would Shaoqing's sect, spiritual master Wen could not continue his sentence? With Shaoqing's sect's usual style, it was not impossible that they would not do that. Chu Rui looked at everyone and said, since Qinsong school dares to do this, how can they not have a backup plan? However, junior sister Wen is right about one thing. No matter what they want to do, as long as they harvest the earth's qi, such a crazy action will make them the enemy of all the cultivators in the world. Even if Shaoqing really works with them, how can they resist the vast power of the world? When the 5 of them heard that, their spirits were lifted. They did not care about the power of the world. They only knew that Yu Xiao had the jade cliff that could suppress the continent. Back then, the cultivators of the West continent could not even break through it when they fought with the demons. It was clear how strong it was. With this treasure, they might not be invincible, but at least they could protect their sect. Chu Rui straightened his body and said in a deep voice, go to Yu Xiao school and tell them that Yuan Yang sect is willing to ally with them to fight against Qinsong. Chapter 1169. After Tan Dingxian left the mountain gate, he rode a swift cloud and arrived at the Yu Xiao school on the same day. The Yu Xiao school had already received a letter from Bu Tian Pavilion. After Zhenren Kongjing reported to Master Lingya, he received a series of instructions. At this moment, he was summoning the sect's spiritual masters to the hall to discuss countermeasures. When they heard his arrival, they immediately invited him in. As soon as Tan Dingxian entered the hall, she raised her head and looked around. She saw Reverend Kongjing, Zhou Dongpa, sitting on the seat of honor, and the other 5 hall masters of the Zhou clan sitting on the left. On the right were the 3 peak masters of the Wu clan, leaving only the seat of honor empty. It was such a big matter, but Master Lingya did not come out to preside over the situation. He could not help but feel suspicious, but it was not convenient for him to ask. He only stepped forward and bowed, saying, greetings, fellow Taoists from Yu Xiao school. The Yu Xiao people in the hall returned the greeting. Zhenren Kongjing said, Sect Master Tan, it must have been hard for you to come here in a day. Tan Dingxian shook his head and sighed. For the sake of the 9 continents' spiritual vigor, for the stability of the world, I had to do this. If I can give up this body to save the situation, I am willing. Zhenren Kongjing said a few more polite words and invited him to sit in the guest seats. He said, I have already sent letters to the heads of the various sects, inviting them to come together to discuss matters. Just wait for a moment and they will be here. Tan Dingxian was surprised. Fellow Taoist, did you invite the heads of the various sects to come here personally? Zhenren Kongjing said with certainty, of course. Just now, we can gather together to fight against Qinsong. Tan Dingxian hesitated for a moment and asked cautiously, but if all the heads of the various sects come here, how will they defend their mountain gates? The mountain gate of Bu Tian Pavilion was a natural formation map. As long as it did not fall to the ground, they were not afraid of being surrounded by Qinsong school. However, the other sects were not so sure. Zhenren Kongjing said meaningfully, if Qinsong school wanted to make a move, they would have done it a long time ago. They would not have waited until now. I think it is because I am afraid of the profound technique in sect leader Tan's hands. Other than him, there were very few people in the Yu Xiao sect who knew about the profound technique. Because they were about to face the sect war, they could not avoid this point. Before this, there was already an explanation. At this moment, no one here understood the meaning behind it. Spiritual Master Bai Bai, Zhou Liguang interrupted. However, the Qinsong school is still extracting the earth qi at this moment. If we let it go on like this, it would definitely be inappropriate if they were to borrow the grand spiritist profound art. The perfected persons below nodded in agreement. Like the Qinsong school, if there was enough spiritual opportunity, many things could be done. Previously, no one knew how much qi of the earth had been extracted, but the spiritual vigor of the Qinsong school had not reached the point of exhaustion. Therefore, there must be a purpose for it to do so. They were afraid that it was going to set up some powerful means. Tan Dingxian said, "Zhenren Kangjing, don't worry. I came here for this matter. Your sect should know that the Butian Pavilion has a treasure called the Heaven Mending Pearl. In ancient times, the sages had attached a profound technique to it, as long as one threw it into the sky. As long as the pearl does not fall, all the techniques formed by the earth qi within the realm will be returned to their original state." Zhenren Kangjing said cheerfully, "This matter should not be delayed. Sect leader Tan, please use your means." Tan Dingxian excused himself and stood up. He took out a dazzling pearl from his sleeve. It was hard to tell if it was real or fake. He held it in his palm and stroked it with his other hand. He said, "If there is no such treasure, it would not be able to bear this technique. The sages once praised, the immortal spits out his heart and will definitely return the realm to heaven. The morning glow shines on the purple clouds, the sun and moon reappear." As he spoke, he shook his hand and threw the item out. Once the pearl flew out, it immediately rushed into the sky. It seemed to be formed by thousands of rays of light. Once it reached the top of the sky, it spread in all directions and merged with the heaven and earth. At the same time, in the Qinsong school, the Zenrens in the main hall sensed something. Qi Hongchan looked at the sky and said, "It is as sect leader Qin predicted. This heaven-returning righteous will technique has already suppressed the earth qi. If I use it, it will return to its original flow and return without any results." Sect leader Qin said, "We take the earth qi to fly to other realms. We don't use it for anything. Let him do what he wants." Pu Xianxing said, "Rumor has it that the Butian Pavilion has 6 great treasures. If each treasure has a profound technique attached to it, it will be very difficult to deal with." Sect leader Qin said, "The Butian Pavilion was established to protect the spiritual energy of heaven and earth. In Tan Dingxian's hands, even if he doesn't have 6 techniques, he should have at least 3 or 4. Qi Hongchan's expression was serious. He said, "In the current situation, we can only follow sect leader Qin's words and take the defensive position first." Most of the Zenrens below did not say anything. This kind of battle between sects had already surpassed the level of previous battles. The 2 clans came up to compete in profound technique. Whoever had more profound technique would have the upper hand. It was just that the other side had many treasures and could use more profound technique. Therefore, the Qinsong school's current strategy was to use other methods to deal with the attacks. If they could not use their own profound technique, they would not use it so that they could save it for the crucial moment. At the same time, after Tan Dingxian tossed out the heaven-mending pearl, she was about to sit down when she heard a loud rumble outside. She could not help but be shocked and look over. On the Donghua continent, a beam of light shot up into the sky, almost illuminating half of the continent. Everyone here could sense the billowing turbid air that was spreading out with it. Tan Dingxian's eyes widened. This is... Zhenren Kangjing also frowned and said, "Looking at this situation, it seems that the last devil's cave has been born. This time there are no signs?" Tan Dingxian lowered her head and thought for a moment. Maybe it's because the earth root was passive, causing such a change. Zhenren Kangjing pondered for a while and decided not to dwell on this matter. Compared to the matter at hand, the birth of the devil's cave was nothing. However, he thought of something and said, "I wonder if sect leader Tan has sent a letter to the spirit sect to clarify the truth?" Tan Dingxian immediately noticed that when the other party mentioned the devil's sect, the way he addressed them had changed. He immediately knew what was going on and said, "Of course I've reported it to them. Even though the spirit sect has been at odds with me in the past, this is only because of the different paths of cultivation. The earth root has been dug up, and the earth qi has been harvested, which has cut off the path of cultivation for the qi practitioners in the world. It is impossible for them to stay out of this matter." Zhenren Kangjing nodded slowly. At this moment, someone outside said, "Taihao School's sect leader Shang Shuding and Nanhua Sect's sect leader Xiao Lingyun have arrived." Zhenren Kongjing immediately stood up. He raised his hand and said, "Invite them in quickly." A short while later, Shang Shuding and Xiao Lingyun entered the hall and greeted everyone. After they were seated, Xiao Lingyun looked around and asked, "Where is the Exalted One?" Zhenren Kongjing only said, "Lord Shen will be able to hear me when I speak here." Xiao Lingyun nodded. This esteemed person of the Spirit Cliff seemed to have entered that state long ago. He was probably making some arrangements now. Enlightened Master Bai then asked, "Sect Leader Tan, you must have received the letter from Shaoqing. Did you get any reply?" Tan Dingxian said in a deep voice, "Not yet." Enlightened Master Bai said, "Shaoqing has always done things his own way. What is his intention this time?" Zhenren Kongjing said plainly, "If Shaoqing's sect did not know about this beforehand, with the temperament of their people, I'm afraid they would have attacked Qinsong long ago." He paused and looked over. "I won't hide it from Sect Leader Tan. Just now, I went to test the letter, but they did not respond at all. In my opinion, they must have joined hands with Qinsong School." When everyone in the hall heard this, including the two sect leaders, they all had solemn expressions. Although they had guessed the situation before, when they really faced it, they felt a heavy pressure just now. Shaoqing's sect and Qinsong sect's power was not inferior to Yu Xiao. If they joined hands, they would occupy 60% of Xianmen. Even if they could win, they would have to pay a heavy price. Zhenren Kongjing said, "Don't worry, everyone. As the saying goes, a just cause enjoys abundant support. This time, not only Xianmen, even Ling's sect will not allow them to do as they please. Moreover, a few hours ago, I received a letter from Yuan Yang sect's sect leader, Chu Rui. He is willing to form an alliance with me. He should be on his way now." When this news was released, everyone's spirits were lifted. Yuan Yang sect's sect leader, Chu Rui, had already cultivated his nascent fetus. He also had 5 enlightened masters under him. His strength was definitely not weak. With him joining them, their chances of winning increased. Enlightened Master Bai said, "Since Qinsong School dared to use Earth Qi, they must have a strict plan. As for us, we responded in a hurry. It's inevitable that our plan is not thorough." Zhenren Kongjing nodded and said, "That's right. Does anyone have a countermeasure?" Xiao Lingyun said, "I have a plan. We can send a messenger to Qinsong School to question and denounce them. Not only will we have a righteous cause, but we can also delay them." Zhenren Kongjing nodded and said, "That's one method." Tan Dingxian thought for a while and cupped his hands. He said, "Everyone, I have a xianshu passed down by my ancestors. It's called Yuan Tian Beyond Heaven. It's stored by borrowing the sect's precious treasure, square shifting dial. As long as it's used, it can divide the heavens and defend itself. Although it's in one world, it's divided into 2 elements. This way, we'll have enough time to discuss a countermeasure." Shang Shuding and Xiao Lingyun's expressions changed slightly. Both their sects had people who had ascended. As the sect leaders, they naturally knew what xianshu was. Zhenren Kongjing was surprised and said, "Oh, there's such a wonderful technique in this world?" He cupped his hands and said, "Sect Leader Tan, please use it quickly." Tan Dingxian acknowledged and walked into the hall. He then took out a sun and moon dial and pressed it lightly. A ray of light shot out. In an instant, everyone looked down from Mochiu Cliff. It was as if the entire Donghua continent had become extremely far away. Tan Dingxian pointed and said, "There's a saying from my ancestors about this technique. Originally, the innate qi was born from one qi, movement and stillness are separated from the outside. However, it's easy to take the mind of others and wander around the 10,000 ruins." Once this technique was used, 3 to 5 days would pass in Yuxiao, while only 1 day would pass in Qinsong School. This way, they would have more time to plan and make arrangements. However, the further the distance between the 2 parties, the stronger the effect. The closer they were, the weaker the effect of the technique. If they were within a few miles, then it would be practically useless. When Xiao Lingyun saw the ability of this technique, she was also extremely shocked and secretly shook her head. This sect leader Tan was too impatient. This kind of profound technique, who knew how many uses it had during battle? Why was he in a hurry to use it in front of him? However, after thinking about it again, she glanced at Jinren Kongjing and her heart was slightly moved. There were many treasures in Butian Pavilion. Looking at it this way, the number of Xianshu they controlled was indeed a little too much. It was not without threat to other sections. Perhaps Yu Xiao had the intention to purposely use this opportunity to wear them down. Chapter 1170. After Tan Dingxian used the two profound techniques, he had already bought enough time for Yu Xiao's side, and they began to discuss countermeasures in the main hall. About half a day later, a ray of spiritual light suddenly descended from the top of the main hall and landed on the main seat. Jinren Kongjing's expression turned solemn. He immediately stood up and said, "Master's decree has arrived." All the spiritual masters in the hall also stood up at the same time. The three sect masters looked at each other. It was not good for them to sit still, so they stood up together to show their respect. When the rainbow slowly dissipated, there was no one on the seat, only a talisman book was left. Jinren Kongjing tidied up his robes, walked forward and took the talisman book into his hands. At the same time, his face revealed a listening expression, and he nodded from time to time. After a while, he bowed and said, "Disciple understands." He turned around and returned to his seat. He invited everyone to take a seat and said to Tan Dingxian and the others, "Long before you arrived, the esteemed master had already executed a mysterious technique. However, the one who has the advantage of this technique wins. In order to prevent the Yutsong sect from finding out in advance, the esteemed master is currently sitting in the pavilion pass, obstructing the heaven's will. Previously, the arrangements were not completed, so it was not appropriate for me to announce it. Now, I can tell the three of you clearly." Xiao Lingyun saw that he was speaking in such a serious manner. She asked curiously, "I wonder what's so special about this profound technique that actually requires master to personally conceal heaven's secrets?" Jinren Kongjing's body straightened. He cupped his hands towards the sky and said, "This technique is called the shifting feather technique. It was passed down by my ancestral master. It can use power to suppress others, and those who win can borrow the power of heaven's secrets to eliminate all enemies. This can be explained in one sentence. It is said, Light Swan knows the profound meaning, myriad transformations hide the wonders of the Tao, and travel around endlessly. One feather determines heaven's secrets. Once this profound technique is used, there is no distinction between friend and foe. The people competing with each other, what they need to do is to continuously gather power, such as luck, fate, human heart, and even the number of enemies and so on. It will all be used as a measure of victory and defeat, assuming that the number of people on both sides is equal, as long as one side is united. If one's heart was united, or if one continuously gained the upper hand in a battle, then one's influence would continue to grow. If he couldn't find a way to counterattack, then in the end, even his own life would be difficult to protect in the end. After listening to his detailed explanation, sect leaders Shang and Xiao were amazed at the wonders of this technique, but at the same time they were doubtful. Once this profound technique was used, if everything went smoothly, as long as one side was powerful. When it reached a point where it could no longer be contained, then there was no need to fight at all to kill the enemy. Since this was something passed down by ancestor Yao Han, it was impossible. Then why didn't the ancient Western continent cultivators use it when they went east? But when the two of them thought about the situation of the Donghua continent from now on, they seemed to understand something. Tan Dingxian, on the other hand, was astonished. "So this technique was actually passed down by your sect's founder." He was about to say something but immediately realized that it was inappropriate and immediately shut his mouth. Jinren Kongjing seemed to have seen through his thoughts. He smiled faintly and said, "Sect leader Tan, you don't have to hide it. Although this technique was passed down by the ancestral master, it was only after he crossed the east." Only then did Tan Dingxian feel relieved. He sighed and said, "That's a pity. If this technique was used during the Western continent's eastern expedition, there wouldn't have been so many casualties." Jinren Kongjing shook his head and said, "It's not that easy. The demons were so powerful at that time. This technique could hurt people, and it could also hurt me. Moreover, those few heavenly demons were mixed in with the world. Even if it was used, it might not be of much use." At this point, he changed the topic and said, "This is already in the past. Let's not talk about it for now." Tan Dingxian and the others quickly agreed. After another half a day, a disciple came up to the hall and said, "Reporting to Perfected Master, Yuan Yang Sect's sect leader Chu is almost outside the mountain gate." Jinren Kongjing's eyes lit up and he said, "Good. Everyone, please sit here and wait for me to personally come out to welcome you." After apologizing to the 3 sect leaders, he left and arrived at the entrance of the mountain. Not long after that, a golden ship appeared in front of them. The rainbow light on the ship didn't dissipate, and the ship's arms were stretched out like a pair of wings, as if it could reach infinitely far away. It was the Golden Altar Magnetic Great Mountain Ship, the personal ride of the leader of the Yuan Yang sect. The ship stopped 100 miles away from Mo Chiu Cliff. Chu Rui got off the carriage and walked towards them. Behind him were Perfected Master Wu and Perfected Master Wu. He had been traveling at full speed without any delay. He should have arrived a long time ago, but because he was under the control of Yuan Tian, he did not arrive until now. Reverend Kongjing greeted him in front of the door. After exchanging greetings, he welcomed him into the hall. He greeted everyone for a while before he sat down. Since there were still external enemies, Jinren Kongjing did not beat around the bush. He said directly, "I received a letter from sect leader Chu, saying that you are willing to form an alliance with Yu Xiao sect. Is that true?" Chu Rui nodded and replied, "Yes, I do." Speaking of this, his expression became solemn. "But before that, I need your sect to make a promise to Yuan Yang sect." Jinren Kongjing's expression also became solemn. He said, "Please speak, sect leader Chu." Chu Rui looked straight at them and said slowly, "No matter what the situation is, your sect must protect our mountain gate and the spiritual cave." Jinren Kongjing was about to speak, but he suddenly looked like he was listening. After a while, he nodded and said, "Esteemed Master has just passed down a decree saying that this matter can be granted to sect leader Chu." He looked at Tan Dingxian and the other 2 and said, "Not only Yuan Yang, as long as Yu Xiao sect is an ally, we can protect their mountain gate and spiritual cave." Chu Rui looked at him for a while, then stood up and bowed. "From this moment on, Yuan Yang sect is an ally of your sect." After he said that, for some reason, everyone suddenly felt a strange feeling. They felt that the qi dynamic in their bodies rose. Although it was not an increase in mana, they could feel that the right time, the right place, and the right people were all on their side. This feeling was quite mysterious. Chu Rui also felt this strange feeling. After a brief investigation, he found that there was nothing disadvantageous to him. He asked in surprise, "Did your sect do something?" Jinren Kongjing smiled and said, "Sect leader Chu, don't be surprised. This is a mystical technique of Yu Xiao sect." Although they had not officially signed the contract, the fact that a sect leader came to his mountain gate personally showed enough sincerity. Therefore, he did not hide anything and told him about the previous arrangements. After Chu Rui finished listening, he was also moved and said, "There is actually such a wonderful technique in this world?" The Yuan Yang had sent out people like Hong Yu and also left behind a mystical technique. However, this technique needed to be used with the sect guarding magic treasure, the Xuanjiang Wall. Moreover, it only had the power to defend the mountain and did not have the ability to attack. It could not be compared to this mystical technique at all. He thought about it again and quickly realized that every step of Yu Xiao school was just right. The 2 mystical techniques of Butian Pavilion could be considered Yu Xiao's first move, and his arrival had greatly increased the chips on Yu Xiao's side. What was even more amazing was that Master Lingya actually had a way to conceal the secrets of heaven. This was not that simple. It must be another mystical technique. By the time Qinsong School realized that something was wrong, Yu Xiao would have accumulated a great advantage step by step. It would be extremely difficult to reverse it. But at the same time, he thought about what would happen if he threw himself into Qinsong School. When he thought about this, he shook his head. The reason why he chose Yu Xiao was because he thought highly of Yu Xiao's side, but there was another important reason. Once the two sides fought, Yu Xiao had Yuya in his hands and could suppress the continent. Then, at least the Yuanyang Mountain Gate could be preserved. And from his point of view, Qinsong School was fighting with their backs to the wall. Their own spirit cave might not be able to be preserved, but forget about the Friendly Alliance Mountain Gate. Even if they won, it would be a Pyrrhic victory. At that time, Yuanyang's foundation would be destroyed, and it would not be easy to recover. He could estimate that Qinsong School had the Huanzhen Temple, so the 6 great demon sects would most likely not get close to them. When they also came to learn, or stood on Yu Xiao's side, then the momentum here would be even greater, and it would definitely be pushed to an unprecedented peak. This was like several streams converging into a surging river, and it flowed downwards. Any obstacle in front of it would be smashed to pieces. Tan Dingxian sighed, "It would be best if we could use this technique to settle things in one go, and we don't have to fight." Shang Shooting stroked his beard and shook his head. Although Leader Tan has a good idea, Qinsong School is not easy to deal with, not to mention the Shaoqing sect. It will not be so easy. Zhenren Kongjing said, "Leader Shang is right. Although we have used this technique, Qinsong School and Shaoqing sect are both great sects that have existed for tens of thousands of years, so it is not like they have no way to fight back. They will definitely think of all kinds of ways to break my technique." He paused and looked at the crowd. "There is one more thing that we need to be wary of. Everyone knows about the treasure of your sects, and even the Shaoqing sect has heard about it. However, no one knows what the treasure of Qinsong School is for tens of thousands of years. Since my grandmaster left behind a technique, Tai Mingzhenren might know about it. If he uses it, he might be able to turn the situation around." Everyone thought about it and their expressions froze. Small sects needed to publicize their treasures, not for the sake of showing off, but to deter their enemies. As for large sects, even if they did not have a treasure of their own, they would not be afraid of their enemies. Usually, they would not reveal their treasures to the outside world. Shaoqing disdained to hide it, while Yu Xiao School was too famous for its Jade Cliff. As for Qinsong School, it had always kept it secret. Even if the outside world had guessed about it, no one could be sure. If there was a mystical technique attached to it, it might have been left behind by Tai Mingzhenren Kongjing, so its power would definitely not be small. Zhenren Kongjing said again, "However, there is no need for everyone to panic. I am telling everyone about this to let everyone know that everything is within Master's expectations. Although I might not be able to suppress both Qinsong and Shaoqing sect with this technique, I can force them to use their killer moves one by one. Even if they can escape, they will not be able to turn the situation around in the end. At most, they will struggle a few more times." Xiao Lingyun frowned and thought to herself, "From the looks of it, if everything goes smoothly, we can suppress our opponents with just this mystical technique and solve all the problems." What Butian Pavilion did previously was not rash, but a great contribution. It is a pity that the ascended spiritual master of my Southern Flower sect did not leave behind any mystical technique. Otherwise, we can interfere at this time. To be continued, you're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.